Actually, good morning, I guess. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to the Safe Communities Committee meeting. We will start with introductions, and as you can see, we have a very long agenda, so we want to get going on it. We will start with, to my left in the room, and then go to other committee members, council members who might be on with us who are not committee members, and our other guests that are online.
Federico Rios, Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration.
Johnny Jennings, Chief of Police, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
James Mitchell, Vice Chair.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Marie Harris, Strategy and Budget.
Not, I like how you just skip right over me. Larkin Eggleston, Committee Chair, and I'll remind everybody on the call, if you can please mute your mic, except for when you're speaking. We're already getting some feedback. We'll go with our committee members now.
Dimple Ashbera, Committee Member. Renee Johnson, Committee Member. Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Other council members joining us?
Braxton Miss Avalon.
Matt Newton, District 5.
And other guests, in no particular order, which should be fun. Great.
Anthony County City Clerk's Office.
Tanya Jameson, representing both Citizens Review Board and Citizens Input Group.
Rebecca Patton with IMG Center for Data and Analytics.
Stella Patterson, CMPD.
Jason Helton, CMPD.
Ryan McGill, representing Civil Service Board.
My name is Julian Wright. I'm one of the lawyers for the Citizens Review Board.
I think we have a few other staff on. If anybody wants to introduce themselves, they can. And if not, we'll get started. So, Mr. Jones, will you give us a quick overview of the agenda in front of us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair. As you can see, we have a large agenda today, and we're going to try to get through all of that. Some of the process that we have is to bring something to this committee, have an opportunity for the committee to digest it, then come back to the committee with a topic for further discussion before a recommendation is made. So when you see things like 8 can't wait on here, again, it's intentional because all of the work hasn't been done, and Chief Jennings will give you an update on that. I think it's important also, Mr. Chair, to talk a little bit about the work that's happening outside of this committee. The council, with the various committee chairs, have referrals that are specific to violence reduction and how we address policing and all that comes in that, from how we help with making communities safe, and that could be from what we do with our roads and streets and sidewalks all the way up to having the correct complement for police officers. So as we go through the month of August, all of the committees, council committees, have some assignment. I think as few as 1 and maybe as many as 4 topics in these areas. So staff will be working diligently to help the committees get that information through. Also, 4 quick updates, because we've been talking about violence interrupters and cure violence, so I don't want that to sit outside of these committee meetings. One, the Community Executive Steering Committee met, and that includes myself, the county manager, the chief of police, the sheriff, members from the health organizations, and we talked a bit about how we can further collaborate. That's one of the 4 pillars that came out of this committee as we started to talk about violence prevention. In terms of the violence interrupter, we've talked about Cure Violence, the street-based violence interrupter. They will be here in the next couple of weeks, both virtually, and then we will get them boots on the ground here in Charlotte. So we have that engagement going. I'm very excited about that. The hospital-based violence interrupter, we have worked with Atrium, and I'm sorry, let's take a step back. And the county will partner with the city in the street-based violence interrupter program. So I'm very appreciative to Dina and Gibby for being partners there. The hospital-based violence intervention program, we're also working with Atrium, and we are just dotting the I's and crossing the T's there. I've spoken specifically with Gene Woods, the CEO, and he's excited to partner with us. This is something that's important to them also. And then I apologize to you, Mr. Driggs, a little bit of a spoiler alert, but in the Budget and Effectiveness Committee today, we will unveil the Community Violence Data Dashboard, something that we talked with the council about to make sure that we're seeing not just these focus areas, or sometimes we call them hot spots, but to make sure that we have something that the community can see and interact with in terms of how we're tracking violence. With that said, in terms of the committee today, we will have Federico talk a little bit about the community group, and they have talked about some additional topics that are on our agenda for today, and he'll explain a little bit about how some of those topics will be pushed to the next meeting. And as we work here in this space, one of the keys is to have the community input group have their information shared with the committee before the committee moves forward with a particular area. We have the police chief will give us an update on 8 Can't Wait, and then we will continue our discussions about the CSB and CRB. We've had some, I think, very good dialogue, both at the community group level, but even some conversations between me and the chief and the board chair. And I believe that we're headed in the right direction, and that's very important. And then we'll continue the discussion about police training. We weren't able to get there last time, but we have it on the agenda today. And then the new item would be the rules of conduct, where we would have CMPD to give us an overview. Then we'll do as we typically do, and that is talk about the next steps. Again, a lot to do, not just in this committee, but committees throughout the council, and we just continue to be excited that we believe we're doing this the right way. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. So as you can see, both from looking at your agenda and from hearing Mr. Jones' overview, we do have a lot to cover today. So we will try to keep it moving as best possible, and we will lead off with Mr. Rios giving us a recap of the last community input group meeting from last week.
Good morning. Thank you again, Chair, Vice Chair, City Manager, and other staff present. Just want to go over quickly. This is a quick synopsis of our last meeting for 2 reasons. One, in the interest of time, but then 2, also because the presentation you will be seeing today on training is the presentation that was given during the community input group meeting. I want to ensure that I mention that the past CIG was the first time we had breakouts with our smaller groups. We had excellent feedback from our facilitators and from participants. This group has been really hungry to get to work, and so this past meeting was really the time that they were able to spend some concentrated, focused time looking at all of the things that they've been tasked with and creating those subgroup analyses that you all have already received. There were 4 absences this last meeting, and a number of individuals were not able to remain for the entirety of the meeting. The meeting is now a 2-hour meeting, and so we're mindful of that and trying to ensure that individuals have pathways to get information to us related to the work that they are doing. 2 participants have not been in 2 consecutive meetings, and so that will require me to follow up with those individuals to see if they can continue participating in the group. Also, we took a vote by doodle poll amongst the members of that group to, beginning the week of September 15th, have all CIG meetings take place the Thursday of the same week as the Safe Communities meeting. So this allows us 1 full week to work on these subgroup analyses, get all of the research and documents that individuals feel that they would need to make the best presentations possible to this committee. Lastly, due to,
So that schedule change has been approved? Or
yes, the group has,
Yes.
we opened up a window for voting, and overwhelmingly the vote was for that schedule change.
So
Again, that will not
start.
take place until the week of September 15th.
Heard. Thank you.
So that's when we will switch. It gives people some time to change their schedules. Lastly, City Manager Jones alluded to this. The next CIG meeting is when we will begin discussing peaceful protests. We had a lag at our last meeting related to the Civil Service Board presentation, and so to allot them more time to get together their presentation for this meeting, we will move the peaceful protest piece till the next CIG meeting, which will occur next week, Thursday. And so, in conclusion, that is our update.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions yet for Mr. Rios? Again, noting that some of what we're going to be talking about later, he will get us up to speed on the feedback from the community input group as it relates to the topics that they covered in the last meeting when we get to those for our discussion. Not seeing any hands as of yet, so let's jump into policy stuff. Chief, if you will let us know what the latest is on our seeking to better align with the 8 Can't Wait initiative.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we shared last week where we were with the 8 Can't Wait and some progress that very proud of that we've made to this point. And if you can remember, last week we spoke of 4 that we were still working with the architects of the 8 Can't Wait, and those were duty to intervene, ban shooting at moving vehicles, require exhaust of all alternatives before shooting, and require comprehensive reporting. So our policy team and the 8 Can't Wait folks that we've been continued to work together, and we've met standards to reporting the requirement with the body-worn camera, tagging and reporting, as well as the signal sidearm that I spoke of last week. That has been able to meet the requirement for comprehensive reporting according to the 8 Can't Wait cohort, people that have, architects that have worked on that. And we've also met the duty to intervene standard that we spoke with, that it falls under our neglect of duty policy in rule of conduct. Some of the things that we continue to work on, there are 2 locations that we need to still come together and meet with and talk about and hopefully satisfy at some point. The one that I'm least optimistic is the restriction of shooting at moving vehicles. We've still been working on the idea of whether a vehicle can be used as a deadly force weapon towards individual or individuals. And we've seen across the nation where vehicles have been used as weapons to run into protests or groups of people, and some of those, the only way to stop that individual was to fire at the moving vehicle. And so we're working with the architects of They Can't Wait on that as well, to try and hopefully come to a resolution and have some sort of some better dialogue that can satisfy that requirement. The other one is the requirement of exhaust all alternatives before shooting. I feel very confident in that. They're requesting a specific statement that states that deadly force is only to be used as a last resort. I think a lot of our wording indicates that already, and we're going to be working on that to make sure we satisfy that that piece of the 8 Can't Wait as well. So that's my report on that, if there's any questions.
Can you reiterate with the holster monitors?
Yes.
The implementation of that, those have been rolled out. What percentage of the force have those been rolled out to now, and will they ultimately be every single patrol officer?
They are actually rolled out to every patrol officer at this time. So we got our first batch in, and that was enough to satisfy for every patrol officer. And the goal is to continue issuing those out to every sworn officer with a firearm.
And then are there members of our department that are not necessarily on kind of normal patrol that don't have those, or should anybody with a CMPD badge, should the public expect that they would have that technology as part of their turnout gear?
At this point, there are folks that, like our CMPD detectives, some of our specialized assignments, but at this point, there are some that do not, but that's just a matter of logistics that we need to get those others ordered and in. And then we can equip the officers with it. But what we wanted to do initially, because of the amount of contact with our patrol that they have with the general public, that was the first phase that we wanted to make sure we got that rolled out.
So all patrol have it, and ultimately all sworn officers will?
That's correct. Now, there may be some exceptions with undercover officers, things like that, but yes, the goal is to equip all officers with it.
Thank you. Ms. Watlington, you had a question?
Real quick, I just wanted to know very briefly, in regards to the shooting at moving vehicles, I saw on the 8 Can't Wait matrix that there were some cities that already had it. Can you talk a little bit about what their policies state?
Yeah, what I can tell you is we have always had a policy against shooting at moving vehicles, but we also had an exception in if that vehicle is used as a deadly weapon by a suspect, to where if it was trying to run over an officer and that officer had no avenue of escape, or if we had an event where the vehicle ran into a crowd and we had no other means to stop it. What the discussion with the 8 Can't Wait folks is that they feel that a weapon, their opinion is that a vehicle cannot be used as a deadly weapon. And we, of course, we are contrary to that belief and thought, that we feel like there needs to be an open avenue to where we can't just say that we can never shoot at a moving vehicle. And that's really the hang up with them. And at one point we were, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I might not have asked my question. I was actually asking about the benchmark cities, what their policies reflect right now, because I would imagine they have the same concerns as CMPD. So I was curious as to what ultimately ended up in their policy, or if there were any comments regarding the benchmark cities.
How have the cities that have complied per Campaign Zero's analysis with that item written their policies? Is that the question, Ms. Watlington?
Yes, that's the question. Thank you.
I certainly can get that for you and make sure, but my understanding is there are some agencies that have come out and said there will be no shooting at moving vehicles. So I can get some more information on that and provide that at a later time.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands, but I am glad that we are not only making demonstrable progress towards that goal that we set as unanimously as a council, I guess that's been 2 months ago now, but that we are still working with them and not just giving up on the ones that are a little bit harder. So, Chief, as I stated 2 weeks ago, and I think was echoed by at least one of our community input group members, but I'm sure the sentiment is shared across the committee, I think it was a powerful statement on your part, and one that I'm greatly appreciative of, that you said, you know, yes, we had put out this graphic that said CMPD had something in their policy that addressed all 8 of these. While that might have been true, I think we as a council and a lot in the community felt like that just because we had something didn't mean we had the right thing, and that we were really as far as we needed to be on some of those items. And I think that the work you've done since has shown that there was room for improvement, and your willingness to admit that we had a room for improvement, take down that graphic and say we're not going to put that back up so we feel like everyone's on the same page, was a demonstration of your willingness as chief to be a part of this work with our community, and for that I'm greatly appreciative. If we don't have any other questions, we are, I don't want to jinx us, but we're moving along well here. Mr. Jones.
So, Mr. Chair, I was going to say the same thing. So through the first 3, great timing. I just wanted to make sure that members of the committee and we'll make sure that we have this out to the community. There were 8 questions asked last time, and the staff has provided answers, I believe, to 7 of the 8, and they ranged from the types of calls that police receive all the way to police pay comparative to other jurisdictions. So I just wanted to let
And if
you know.
anybody at home wants to pull that up as reference, you should have an email from 10:29 this morning. Thank you to Gwen Miller for getting that out to us prior to our meeting. So if you haven't seen that, look for Gwen Miller's email from 10:29, and that will give you a lot of the data that many of you have asked for over the course of the last couple of meetings. And I do have Ms. Ajmera with a question. Ms. Ajmera?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for the rules of conduct intervention, 11.B, what has changed there? I didn't follow that one.
Is as related to 8 can't wait, or is this something that when we get to agenda item 6?
No, it's still part of the 8 can't wait. I guess it's still, I guess why it still says manifest it. Okay, is there still a manifest injustice threshold? If Chief can explain that.
What I can tell you, Councilwoman, is that our duty to intervene that falls under neglect of duty was enough to satisfy the 8 can't wait. We did have to make some minor adjustments to the wording on that, and we broke it out as duty to intervene in the comments that go along with it. But I will have some discussion on that with the rules of conduct presentation as well, but we were able to satisfy that with the 8 can't wait architects.
Okay, so the request that we have gotten for specifically this rule is that there has to be a change of language where it would say, it will say what the request came from. I'm sorry, I'm trying to sort of juggle here in between 2 screens because, looking at my iPad, but at the same time, there was this request that came from 8 Can't Wait organization. So when you look at rules of conduct, I can wait till let me get this specific language for you, and then I'll just wait.
But I think what she's saying is that the Campaign Zero, the organization that created 8 Can't Wait, took a look at what CMPD's revised policy is and said that that met the threshold for what their expectation or their recommended policies.
Yeah, and if I may, Mr. Chair, just also the website is a couple of weeks behind, so so if you're looking at it now, it might say we only satisfied 3 or 4 of the recommendations, but they are a couple of weeks behind on updating it, so that will be updated soon.
I think that will help because certainly there is a gap between what's been presented to us versus what's on the website. But if I will review the website once it's updated. If I have any questions, I'll reach out to you, Chief. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you.
I would imagine that there are a lot of cities probably that are doing what we're doing, which is trying to get more aligned as many of these issues have been brought to the forefront publicly. I'm guessing we weren't the only city that had citizens calling for better alignment with those type of policies, and Campaign Zero probably finds themselves right busy these days trying to have the meetings they've been having with police departments all across the country, keep their website up to date, and we do appreciate them lending their time. Sam from Campaign Zero to speak to our community input group recently, which I know was very valuable to that discussion. All right, so if we are clear there, then we will move to our city clerk, Ms. Kelly, to discuss the roles of the Civil Service Board and Citizens Review Board.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, Manager, Attorney, and co-workers.
I'm going to just provide a brief overview of the Citizens Review Board and the Civil Service Board. You've heard this before. I think Ms. Jameson provided an overview, but this is a very brief overview. Next slide, please. The Citizens Review Board was established in 1997, and the board reviews appeals by citizens who file complaints on dispositions imposed by the chief of police or his designee relating to allegations of misconduct against a sworn police officer. Currently, the board is comprised of 11 members. 3 are appointed by the mayor, 5 by council, and 3 by the city manager. And you can see the breakdown of the membership. The most current member was appointed a couple weeks ago, so that demographic is not reflected in the numbers shown there in the breakdown. The types of complaints that the Citizens Review Board reviews there are 5: the use of force, unbecoming conduct, arrest, search and seizure, arbitrary profiling, and discharge of a firearm by an officer which results in the death or injury of a person. In addition, the board also serves in an advisory role to the chief of police, the city manager, and the city council. And it is charged with making periodic reports to the chief of police, the city manager, the city council, and the community relations committee. And the board also provides an annual report of their activities. Going back to the membership of the board, the terms of office are 3 years, staggered, and each member is, in accordance with city policy, is allowed to serve 2 terms. Serving as counsel to the board are 3 attorneys from the firm of Robinson and Henshaw, and they are Carrie Davis, Julian Wright, and Gabe Wright. So that's the Citizens Review Board. And if Wendy would go to the next slide, I will just speak briefly about the Civil Service Board.
Madam Clerk, if I can real quick jump in and allow the Vice Chair to ask a question there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
And Stephanie, this might be a question actually for council and the city manager and the city attorney. Why do we set up to have outside counsel to staff this board as opposed to internal attorneys?
I don't think it's fair that Patrick put his mask on just now.
I want it muffled so no one hears what I'm saying.
There are pros and cons, as I've talked to Patrick about this in the past, and I think Patrick will tell you about the pros and cons.
Yeah. So I think it was baked into the legislation, and I'll have to double check that, of how the board would be staffed. Not every community has outside counsel doing it, and I came from a community that did not. The city attorney's office handled it in Durham, and in Charlotte it's always been this way. And I think it's baked in to the enabling legislation, but I'll double check that.
And Mr. Chair, just follow. And Julie, no offense to you, but I'm just asking the question because I cannot remember when I got on council that we had outside counselors. So I think it's just a question. So,
and if I could add to that, I mean the issue, the pros and cons are. I know in Durham on occasion when a complaint wouldn't go forward.
So if anybody who's on the call that's not muted, if you can mute, we're getting a lot of feedback from somebody.
Yeah, the pros and cons relate to the role of the attorney, and the attorney's role was very limited. But if a complaint didn't go forward to a full hearing, there was some pushback as to, well, you've got the city attorney who's defending the city in the room. It's not a surprise that it didn't go forward. And the other side of it is the cost associated with hiring outside counsel. If you can properly limit the city attorney's role, then you're not incurring those costs, nor do you have the city attorney, with that perception. But the reality is the perception is the perception, if people feel that way.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, City Attorney.
Mr. Mitchell, this is Julian Wright. I assure you, no offense taken. I think the original decision back in 1997 to hire our firm had to do both with the reality and the perception that you didn't want potentially members of the city attorney's office representing both the police department and representing the board that was making those decisions.
Okay.
That to promote the independence of the board to the citizens who would be filing appeals with it, it would be important for it not to be an attorney in the city's attorney's office providing advice to the decision-making body.
Got it. Thank you.
Makes sense. Ms. Kelly?
Distinction between one distinction between the two boards, the Civil Service Board.
This is Matt Newton, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I had a question as well, and my hand went up a little late.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
So I apologize. Before we move on, I just had a quick question about the Citizens Review Board. I wanted to ask, and I don't know who could field this, but do we know what assistance is provided to citizens to navigate the process that was described, whereby they file a complaint or address or raise a concern, and then to get in front of the board and thereafter? Do we have assistance for those folks? What is that?
Mr. Newton, currently the Community Relations Committee has a staff person that is dedicated to assist citizens in the process, to assist them in completing the form, submitting the form, and the appeal form is also available in several different languages. So that the Community Relations Committee is available to assist people without walk them through the process.
I think Chief Jennings wanted to speak to that as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So also, when a citizen does have a complaint that is reviewable by the Citizens Review Board, we are obligated to give them the results of that complaint, and at that time we do provide them with information on if they would like to appeal it to the Citizens Review Board. We give them that information to get them started as well.
Chief, this is at the conclusion of so it's my understanding this is at the conclusion of an internal affairs investigation. Is that right?
That's correct. At the conclusion of the investigation, they get that opportunity.
So everybody who's eligible to potentially appeal or pursue that investigation to the Citizens Review Board gets a packet of information letting them know how to do that, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay. And thereafter, sorry? So thereafter...
Is that Mr. Wright? Mr. Wright, did you want to speak to that?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm on the phone. This is Kerry Davis. I'm Julian's law partner at Robinson Bradshaw, and I thought I might just add something to Councilman Newton's. I just wanted to let you know, Matt, that the Mecklenburg County Bar has got a group of folks, a panel of maybe 15 lawyers who have volunteered on a pro bono basis to assist in these cases if a citizen asks for it and qualifies for pro bono legal assistance. Right before COVID, a couple of us had organized a CLE to do about an hour's worth of training on handling CRB cases, and then COVID came along and we haven't had any new cases on the CRB since, but there is certainly an initiative that is ongoing in the Mecklenburg County Bar to train up folks on a voluntary basis to assist as counsel on pro bono counsel to citizen complainants.
Mr. Kerry, I really appreciate you weighing in and knowing really the crux of my question, because I think you've answered it fabulously. I can only imagine how confusing and potentially intimidating the process can be from start to end. And I think it's great that on the front end we're providing the information, but also throughout the entire tenure of the process, doing all that we can, even if it means that we're partnering with attorneys on the private side through pro bono services. Doing all we can to help folks through this process throughout its entire tenure, all the way to the conclusion. It sounds like that's what you're saying here, with attorneys that are on that private side available to help even after that initial beginning of filing the complaint with the CRB. So thank you so much for that information.
Of course.
Great. All right, Ms. Kelly, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going on to the Civil Service Board, which is a quasi-judicial board that was established in 1929. It is different than the Citizens Review Board, and quite honestly, people often confuse the two, but they are two distinct advisory boards. The Civil Service Board, as I said, was established in 1929 as an act of the General Assembly, North Carolina, a General Assembly. Currently, there are 9 members, 3 appointed by the mayor, 6 by council, and you can see the breakdown of the membership. They too serve 3-year terms, staggered. They meet the first Tuesday of each month. Meetings are open to the public, and they, before COVID, met at the Government Center. And their monthly meetings generally last about an hour, sometimes a little more than that, and then they conduct hearings. And the counsel to the board is a member of the city attorney's staff, and it's Andrea Leslie Fight is the attorney for the Civil Service Board. The Civil Service Board exists currently to primarily evaluate and potentially approve applicants for employment submitted by the police department and by the fire department. Both departments do a thorough background of each applicant, provide that information to the board members. They they take a lot of time in advance of the meeting to carefully review the content of the application. And it's about a 13-page or more application that is required for each applicant. So they review those applicants and, as I said, potentially will approve them. And also they are charged with approving promotions provided by both departments. And also, one other thing that the Civil Service Board does is that they conduct disciplinary hearings for each of the 2 departments, police and fire. When either one of the chiefs cites someone for termination, that requires, that's an automatic disciplinary hearing. The hearing panel is made up of 5 members of the Civil Service Board. Hearings can last anywhere from 1 to 3 days. I would note that the Civil Service Board, in conducting these hearings, they have subpoena power, and they also, in accordance with the legislation associated with the Civil Service Board, those disciplinary hearings can be open to the public or closed, and it's at the discretion of the employee. So they hold these hearings, and at the end of the hearings, they make a decision whether to uphold the chief's recommendation to terminate or to reinstate an employee. They also conduct hearings for employees that are may have received disciplinary action such as a suspension, and they then that requires a 3-member panel, and they then will conduct the hearing and make a decision as to whether or not to uphold the chief's recommendation in those cases. The last thing I would add about the Civil Service Board is that according to the charter, they have the ability to request an investigation from the police or the fire department of police officers or firefighters that are in the public's interest. And notably, the Civil Service Board has, for the first time in my 16 years, almost 17 years working with them, requested an investigation by the police department of the incident of June the 2nd of this year, and is awaiting the findings of that investigation. So with that, I would just be willing to answer any questions. Also, I think on the line is the chair, Mr. McGill. He may be available to answer questions as well.
And I actually believe that Ms. Jamison, who's the chair of the Citizens Review Board, and Mr. McGill, who's the chair of the Civil Service Board, are going to give us a quick presentation from their viewpoint as well. I've got Ms. Watlington's hand up. Ms. Watlington, do you want to ask a question of Ms. Kelly, or do you want to get the presentations from our chairs first?
We can get the presentation from the chairs first.
Great. Ms. Jamison, if you will lead us off.
Tanya, do you want me to take this?
Yeah, so the way we're going to do it is Carrie's going to give you all an overview, not the basics of it, but basically the policy recommendations that we have proposed in the past, those that have been implemented, those have been sort of partially implemented, and then talk you through a little bit about the policy recommendations that we have moving forward. So Carrie?
Super. Thank you, Tanya. And good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I'm doing this by phone. I had a devil of a time trying to get in by WebEx and eventually couldn't, and our agenda item came up, so here I am on the phone. But if you'll indulge me, I'll try to move through this quickly. And the CRB, on behalf of the CRB, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about the work, the important work that the Citizens Review Board has done over the years. I think, most folks understand the CRB to exist, primarily, if not exclusively, to hear citizens' appeals when they are dissatisfied with the results of an internal affairs investigation and determination by the chief not to punish an officer for something that is alleged to be a violation of the 5 policies that Stephanie highlighted. And I think there's been plenty of press about that the CRB oftentimes sides with the police department and the understanding of the role as just being hearing these cases. But I want to focus, the CRB wants to focus on perhaps a lesser known function, and that is the role that Stephanie mentioned of serving as an advisor to the chief. And specifically with respect to the council's current project of reviewing CMPD policies, we wanted to sort of highlight the important work that the board has done over the years to make policy recommendations. And so you understand, the board, as a matter of statute, gets access to confidential personnel information. So what that means is they get the complete internal affairs record, and outside of the police department, they're the only folks who get to see that kind of stuff. So they're in a really unique position to evaluate, on a really granular level, the facts of each case. And they are the sort of eyes of the public to say, hey, maybe we can do things better. And so in the context of nearly almost 100 cases, we've had, 94 cases now, there have been dozens of recommendations that the CRB has made to CMPD over the years in connection with these specific cases. So they'll hear a case, they might determine that CMPD didn't err in not disciplining an officer or not finding a violation of policy, but in looking at the application of that policy to specific facts, comes up with a recommendation that, things can be done better. Maybe the policy needs tweaking. Maybe we need a new policy to address this kind of thing. And so that's what we want to focus on today. And I'm going to talk about 3 different things. I'm going to talk about, just give you an overview of policy recommendations that have been made by the CRB that CMPD has adopted. Then I'm going to slide into a second category. Those are recommendations the board has made but have not been fully adopted. And finally, the board just wants to highlight 3 specific policies for emphasis as we go through this process of taking a look at policies, whether that means strengthening the power and authority of the Citizens Review Board, or maybe a policy that would benefit the community and CMPD. So with that, Stephanie, can everybody see this document that's got the header overview of CRB recommendations and opportunities?
Yep. We've got it right in front of us.
Yes, it is, Carrie.
Super. Sorry, I haven't even asked that. So, okay. Well, let me slide through those and start with the de-escalation requirement. The Citizens Review Board has been making recommendations related to de-escalation and wanting to see specific de-escalation language in CMPD's use of force policy, now called response to resistance policy, and has been making those kinds of recommendations since at least the Keith Scott matter. Eventually, CMPD has put de-escalation language in the policy. It's candidly not as strong as what the board advocated for, but it's in there now, and it's part of there's a bigger focus on training on de-escalation, and so we view that, the board views that as sort of a feather in its hat, something it's been pushing for years. Second is body-worn cameras, and that has been an iterative process over the years. And I mean, stretching back more than a decade. And from the board standpoint, there was always a desire for objective evidence. I mean, in a lot of cases, when you didn't have, as you can imagine, a camera or something recording what folks were saying, you would get to a hearing in front of the Citizens Review Board, and you would have a citizen saying, X happened to me, and the police officer says, no, Y happened, and the Citizens Review Board is left with X and Y. Who are we supposed to believe? And is it, an abuse of the chief's discretion when that was the standard back in the old days, or now was it error for the chief to side with his own officer versus a citizen? Really hard to make that call. So, in a number of cases, the Citizens Review Board said, it sure would be nice to have video and audio so that we can look objectively, and it's not a he said, she said situation, but we can tell what happened. And so there was a push for that over the years, and as we now know, body-worn cameras are universal, but the Citizens Review Board was always behind the push to get that done. There are some specific cases, there are specific contexts in which the body-worn cameras have got to now be activated, and one is when you are asking a citizen when you don't have a warrant and the law enforcement officer wants to search a resident, and you have to get consent from the resident. Requirement now that the body-worn camera be activated. This arose out of a fatal shooting at North Lake Mall on Christmas Eve 5 or 6 years ago. Off-duty officers who are in uniform are also required to now wear body-worn cameras even when they're working off-duty. The third item to highlight here, there are now time limits in place when officers need to complete investigations of minor traffic incidences. The fourth, there is a requirement that the DMVR be activated when transporting a suspect in the police cruiser to the jail. There was a case involving allegedly some inappropriate language and an officer, sort of saying some sexually suggestive things to a female suspect in the back, and no audio to confirm, who was telling the truth. And so now there's a requirement that be activated. The duty to intervene. That is something that CMPD initially pushed for. The Chief Putney asked for citizen input into the use of force policy, and the Citizens Review Board said, well, we think there ought to be a duty to intervene. This was before George Floyd, and that was not adopted. In the recent high-profile Franklin appeal, that was something that was part of the CRB's recommendations as well. Please add a duty to intervene to the policy. And then George Floyd happened, and now it is part of the policy. But the Citizens Review Board has been out front on that issue, for at least a year now. The final one that I'll just call everyone's attention to is a new vehicle apprehension policy in the wake of Keith Scott. Folks will recall that Mr. Scott was in a parked car in an apartment complex parking lot and was spotted with there was a weapon in his car and a marijuana cigarette, a joint, and so there was a decision made to surround the car and and an officer used his baton and breached a window, and then we know what happened after that. There is now a new policy in place about vehicle apprehension in the wake of Keith Scott. So those are all examples of recommendations made by the CRB after hearing and sitting for, in the case of Franklin and the case of Scott, sitting through not only initial hearings but also the evidentiary hearings that can stretch for several days, and taking a good, hard, deep dive look at these cases and making recommendations and adopted. So the board feels really proud and good about the work that it's done in the way of recommendations, and it's had a cooperative relationship with CMPD. CMPD listens and, as these examples show, implement policy recommendations. The second category I want to cover are ones that have not been fully adopted. And so I'll start with subpoena power. This is one that folks talk about a whole bunch. And there's been a push by the legislative delegation to get this through the legislature in Raleigh. That has not been successful. For a number of years, CMPD was behind this, and then recently in the Franklin case, this was the first time in 94 cases that an officer who was the subject of a complaint did not show up at the evidentiary hearing. And one of the recommendations that the CRB made at the conclusion of the Franklin case was, we think that officers ought to be required to show up when they're the subject of a CRB case and show up to the hearing. And when I think that was when it sort of was pushed into the spotlight, that subpoena power can also be used to require the attendance of CMPD officers who are the subject of a complaint. And CMPD said, that's a bridge too far. We're not going to require officers or we're not going to be behind a subpoena that would require the attendance of an officer at a hearing. And so we've had some good discussions with CMPD, though, with Chief Jennings and with Manager Jones, and understand now that CMPD is behind subpoena power as a universal subpoena power. That would be for both officers and third-party citizens who are witnesses in a particular case. We don't know what the prospects, how long that might take to, depending on what happens in November, but whether subpoena power will ever be given to the Citizens Review Board in Charlotte. I'm sure that there are other cities that have review boards that would also want that. And so, until then, one thing that the Citizens Review Board has been kicking around is, could there be, as a matter of city policy, a requirement that CMPD officers who are the subject of a CRB appeal case be required to attend? Frankly, that is something that the police department is not in favor of, and I know Chief Jennings is on this call, and he'll correct me if I get this wrong, but the thinking being that there ought not be a requirement as a matter of employment policy to require an employee, a CMPD officer, to attend when nobody can compel, without subpoena power, can't compel a citizen off the street who may have relevant evidence in a case to voluntarily show up, or you can't compel them to do that. So not fair to require officers if you can't also require citizens to attend. And so that's where we are. I will tell you, I'll sort of give you a flash forward, but one of the things that we would ask everybody to reconsider is until subpoena power is given and granted to the CRB so that they can compel witnesses' attendance, that at least requiring an officer to attend, that's a little bit more information or more evidence for the CRB to consider in making its determination. And there's certainly, in the CRB's view, can't be any harm in having more evidence in the record. Now, if it is an officer who is the subject of a complaint, the officer obviously doesn't leave his or her constitutional rights at the door. And if it is a question that's appropriate to take the Fifth Amendment in response to, the officer, of course, retains the right to plead the Fifth in response to a question. So we're not saying they're required to answer every question. Of course, they can refuse to answer and assert their Fifth Amendment rights. Next is this is something new that has not really been talked about, but the CRB has asked CMPD to consider a new classification or a new disposition in shooting cases. So the way it is right now, a shooting is either justified or it's not justified. And a shooting is justified if the shooting meets an objective standard that is laid out in the U.S. Supreme Court case called Graham v. Connor, and that standard is whether or not the officer reasonably believed that his or her life or others' lives are in imminent threat based on the totality of the circumstances. And in most cases, that standard is dispositive. It is an officer-friendly standard. It's one where if the suspect has a weapon, that it is hard for folks to conclude that the chief gets it wrong when it says that the officer is not, reasonably believes that he or she or others around are in imminent danger, depending on how the weapon might be held or whatever. But it is an officer-friendly standard that has resulted in typically officers being cleared, including in some cases when there are some, perhaps bad judgment calls, other things that officers have done to escalate a situation. And so, the frustration is that all these shooting cases would come in front of the Citizens Review Board. The Citizens Review Board would say, gosh, we either have to choose justified or unjustified, and there were a lot of things that led up to this shooting that if somebody had just taken it easy and tried to take some time and some space and distance, de-escalate the situation, perhaps not violate, some other policy, that it sure is frustrating that the board has got to find this as a justified shooting, and it didn't feel right because there were some things that led up to it that things could have gone in a better direction had other choices been made. And so there was a case, and it was a fatal shooting out on Albemarle Road about 5 years ago, and it was an undercover officer driving an unmarked car, no lights or anything, and a suspect hits this undercover car, fender bender, and then flees. And the undercover officer pursues. This is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Albemarle Road, busy, and sort of chase. And they eventually end at a stoplight, and the suspect, who the officer is chasing, gets out of the car with a weapon drawn. The officer gets out, draws his weapon. There's a shootout, and the suspect ends up dead. But the officer, there's a CMPD policy that requires lights to be activated when you're pursuing, and this is an unmarked car, undercover officer. From the suspect's point of view, the reason for that policy is from the suspect's standpoint, he doesn't know if it's an officer or if it's a road rage situation, somebody just giving chase because they're mad about a fender bender. And so it was out of that case that the Citizens Review Board said, how about a middle ground finding of justified but potentially preventable? Those kinds of cases where you see maybe at the moment of shooting that Graham v. Connor standard that I mentioned was satisfied, objectively reasonable to be an imminent fear, but there were some bad judgment calls made that escalated the situation that led up to the shooting, maybe a policy violation that's relevant that escalated the situation. So we have advocated for that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But that's one that the board feels is important. That says number 4. It really is number 3. Study reaction time when a suspect has a gun, but the gun is pointed at the police, but the police officer has his or her gun trained on the suspect. The suspect has weapon down at his or her side. This was the Keith Scott case, and there's just a question whether or not do you have time, if you're the officer with your gun already trained on the suspect, do you have time to wait to see what the suspect is going to do with that gun that's down at his or her side? Or are you justified in believing that weapon could be used to fire and that you wouldn't have time to react, so you can go ahead and be justified in discharging your weapon? If folks remember the facts in the Keith Scott case, that was the fact setup. And there was an attempt by CMPD to design a study that would test that, and there were just some difficult things because I think that the actors in the study had to know something was going on, and maybe it was very difficult to control for a test that folks could feel confident in the results. But that one has not been completed. And finally, the duty to intervene, and that has now been incorporated into CMPD policy. And the only thing that we would flag here, and I'll just give a preview and we'll take care of this one, is the duty to intervene resides under the neglect of duty directive. And as Stephanie mentioned a while ago, the Citizens Review Board only has jurisdiction to hear appeals arising out of 5 specific policy violations. Neglect of duty is not one of those. And so if the duty to intervene continues to live underneath the neglect of duty policy, then we would ask for the CRB ordinance, as a matter of city ordinance, to be expanded so that that category, neglect of duty, is one that the CRB has jurisdiction to review. I understand that the city manager and the police department are talking about ways to handle that, and they are not opposed to this. And it could live underneath the response to resistance policy or use of force, and then the city ordinance wouldn't have to be changed. But that's something that they are looking into, and so I have just handled. We're now into the 3rd Roman numeral areas to strengthen Citizens Review Board. Jurisdiction to review neglect of duty, the 3rd bullet point I've just addressed. I'll now talk about subpoena power. So I understand with respect to subpoena power that there's going to be another push from this legislative delegation to attempt to do that. And as I forecast before, the Citizens Review Board would like a city policy that would require officers, in addition to whether or not, and whether or not subpoena power is ever granted, to have a city policy that requires officers to at least appear, even if they're going to assert their Fifth Amendment rights, but to appear at CRB evidentiary hearings. These aren't the initial hearings. The initial hearings are the ones that are typically a couple hours and essentially serve as probable cause hearings to determine whether or not there's going to be a trial, an evidentiary fact-finding proceeding. And the subpoena issue only arises in the context of that latter type of proceeding that is more drawn out and there's actual live evidence given under oath. And so, and as I mentioned before, that is something that right now the police department opposes, is having that as a matter of city policy for officers to appear. And so, and then finally, as I mentioned and went over pretty extensively, this justified but potentially preventable disposition, that's something that the board feels very strongly about. And we met with Chief Jennings and Marcus last week and had a good discussion about this. Initially, so I think it's fair. Please, Chief, jump in if I get any of this wrong. But CMPD would say, well, they've already got a directive. It lives under the courtesy policy, and it's basically a provocation policy, and it says the officers will not taunt, verbally bait, or initiate needless or unnecessary physical contact with the subject. And they would prefer to just let that govern those situations and not add a new category of justified but potentially preventable underneath the response to resistance policy. And one justification for not doing that, the chief pointed out, well, that's kind of limitless. It could be used for any number of situations from, did you answer the call for service? I mean, if you didn't answer the call for service, then you wouldn't have been there on the scene and it wouldn't have happened. I mean, that's the extreme, but there could be a lot of other things along the way that are just too attenuated to be causally linked to the shooting itself. And we gave some thought to that. And there are some, you could say that there has got to be some proximate causation. I'm sorry, I'm talking like a lawyer now, but some sort of causal connection between the thing that happened leading up to the shooting and the shooting itself. So, for the example I gave before about
Mr. Davis, I've got a bunch of questions piling up, so I don't want to go too far down the path.
Ability to activate
Mr. Davis, can you hear me?
That's a policy violation. And is it reasonable? So proximate cause has got in the world of the law this objective standard, just like the Graham v. Connors shooting standard I mentioned. Are you objectively in fear, imminent fear of your life or somebody else's life? Proximate cause, if there's a policy violation, is it reasonably foreseeable that a violation of that policy could escalate a situation and get you to a point where there's an imminent threat and then a justification for shooting?
Yeah, I think we understand your example, Mr. Davis, and I've got questions piling up. So I think you explained it very thoroughly, and I want to give Ms. Jamison a chance if she wants to add anything to that, but then I've got questions, and we've got a lot on our agenda. So, Ms. Jamison, did you want to add anything to that very thorough description of the outline there?
No, I think it was a very thorough description of outline, so we'll take questions now. Thank you.
Ms. Wellington, your hand was up earlier. I don't know if that was a civil service or citizens review, but I'll give you the first crack at it if you had a citizens review question.
Sure. My original question was answered, but I do have two more. The first one being very, very briefly, if it is possible, if not, we can skip it. I'd just like to understand, because one of the things we often hear from citizens is, had a private citizen done this, they would have been charged with murder or manslaughter or whatever. Can you tell us very, very briefly what the difference is between the two? Because when people see these kinds of incidents, particularly when there's video, that is the first question that people ask, is how is it that an officer can, quote unquote, get away with murder versus a private citizen? And so I just want to understand a little bit more about how that is interpreted under the law.
Terry, do you think to that brief answer?
Yes. I'll try. I'll do my best here. So, certainly in these cases where there is a fatal shooting, there is, in addition to an internal affairs investigation, there's a homicide investigation as well, and the homicide investigation would look at the shooting from the same standpoint, the same justifiable use of force, that Graham v. Connor Supreme Court precedent, as to was the officer who fired did they reasonably perceive an imminent threat? And that's the standard that's used both to judge whether or not a crime has been committed, and whether or not, in our context, the shooting was justified under CMPD policy. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm sure there'll probably be some follow-ups, but I just wanted to lay that foundational piece. The second thing is, can you restate the recommendation around expanding CRB's ability to look at neglect of duty cases?
Sure. So under the city ordinance that gives the CRB its powers, it lists the kinds of policy violations that the Citizens Review Board has jurisdiction to review, and those include the five that Stephanie mentioned. The duty to intervene is underneath the neglect of duty policy. The neglect of duty policy is not one in the city ordinance that confers jurisdiction on the CRB to hear. And so if there were to be a duty to intervene situation, and it's the subject of internal affairs investigation determination, citizens can't appeal that unless the city council changes the ordinance to give the board the jurisdiction to review those cases, unless the duty to intervene is moved under some policy that the CRB already has jurisdiction to review.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I'd like to move then to enable the CRB to hear neglect of duty violations or neglect of duty complaints, whether by including the duty to intervene sub-policy or moving the neglect of duty specific to a policy that's already covered. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Watlington. So we have a motion on the floor from Ms. Watlington.
Second
and a
motion.
second from the Vice Chair, Mr. Mitchell. Do we have any discussion? I'm not sure. There was some feedback there. I didn't know if somebody was trying to speak or if we.
No, that was my mama.
Hey, Mama.
Chair says hello. He can hear you.
Tell her to come join us. I need to see where you get all these smarts and energy from.
Oh yeah.
Discussion.
Hi, this is Jessica Battle, attorney with CMPD. I know Ms. Watlington just put a motion on the record. I just wanted to go back to her question about the differences in, if a civilian was charged, they will be charged with homicide, manslaughter, et cetera, versus if officers are charged, it's different. It truly is the same for officers. It's just a dual investigation. And so from the internal side, we are looking at the Graham factors. Was it reasonable? Was there a substantial violation of a known law and that sort of thing? When we look at the civil side of it, and internally, we're also looking at the Fourth Amendment side. Did our officers violate any policies? Was their use of force unreasonable from an internal perspective? But parallel to that, we are also, when I say we, I should say the SBI now would also be conducting a criminal investigation. So they're going to gather the physical evidence, do interviews, all those sorts of things. They put together an investigative packet and they give it to the DA's office to make the decision on whether or not the officer should be charged criminally. And so that process with the SBI is very similar to what would be done if a civilian were to shoot somebody. Because if it were a civilian, CMPD would investigate the homicide, collect all the physical evidence, do any interviews, and give the DA's office a packet about the homicide of a civilian. But from the CMPD perspective, the SBI does that gathering, gives the DA the packet to make the final decision. And so I just wanted to clarify that it's a similar criminal investigative, that we are investigating it criminally. It's just parallel to the civil side and the internal investigative side, which would, go a different route, if that makes sense.
Ms. Watling, did you want to respond to that before we let anybody else weigh in on your motion? And I'll ask you, if you will, before we have committee discussion on the motion, if you'll briefly restate your motion, and then we'll let folks ask questions. And then, Ms. Wallington, I'll let you respond to that or restate your motion, and then Chief has asked to weigh in on it as well.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Battle. That was exactly what I was looking for. I appreciate that. To restate my motion, then I move to update our ordinance to enable neglect of duty violations to be reviewed by the Citizens Review Board, whether by including the duty to intervene sub policy, or by moving neglect of duty specifically into a sub policy that's already covered.
Thank you, Chief.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, and also just to be clear, we are okay with that as far as the review of duty to intervene. However, I would like to keep it where it is if you want to have the neglect of duty be reviewable by CRB, but not to move the duty to intervene.
So
I'm fine with that.
Would you like to then restate your motion more specifically based on that?
Sure. I'll just move then to update our ordinance to enable neglect of duty violations to be reviewed by CRB.
Mr. Vice Chair, is your second stand? Yes. Ms. Ashmere, Ms. Johnson, did y'all have any questions on that specific motion before? I know that, Ms. Ashmere, you have a question related to Citizens Review Board, and I'll certainly give you the opportunity to ask that, but did you have anything specific to this motion?
Not specific to this motion.
Okay. And Ms. Johnson, if you had anything specific to this motion or questions?
No, I don't have any specific questions.
Then I think, Mr. Vice Chair, did you have anything specific to this motion, or shall we move to a vote?
Move to a vote, Chairman.
All right, so.
Mr. Chair, it's Ed Driggs.
Yes, sir, Mr. Driggs.
The motion should be for a recommendation to the full council. I don't think the committee has the authority on a standalone basis to impose this.
Yes, sir. That would be what we'd be doing, is sending this forward as a recommendation from the committee to the full council, the recommendation being the motion stated by Ms. Watlington. So, no, I have not somehow managed to grab more power for our committee, I assure you, Mr. Driggs. I would fully expect you to call me out on that if we tried. All right, so, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes.
Ms. Watlington.
Yes.
Ms. Ajmera.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. So that will be a unanimous recommendation from the committee to move to the full council for consideration. Ms. Wellington, did you have additional questions you wanted to ask related to CRB, or is that it for now? Great, thank you.
That's it for me, thank you.
I've got Mr. Mitchell followed by Ms. Ajmera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. I think we took care of an important motion So, Chief and City Manager, just share with us the kind of the pros and cons. Chief, I know you say you have a little opposition for. Let me make sure I got it right. City Manager could require accused officer to appear part of employment policy, and if that's not something CMPD can accept, is there a common ground or a soft spot where we can land? And
Sure. So thank you, Councilmember Mitchell. As we've discussed with the chair of the Citizens Review Board and the lead attorney, we think the better part of this is everybody. And I think that's, I know that's both the previous chief and the current chief. We believe that having witnesses to the event, being able to be subpoenaed, is something that we've always asked for, but that's just me and Chief if there's something different.
No, that's correct. I think my exact words were all or nothing would be my recommendation. So, and even compelling officers to show at the advice of their attorneys as well, that doesn't compel them to actually speak if they invoke their Fifth Amendment right as well. So, I truly believe that if we're going to jump in, we need to jump in with both feet on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Ajmera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. The CRB has a right to see all body-worn camera footage?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's it for you, Ms. Ajmera?
Ms. Ajmera, this is Jessica Battle again. If I could jump in. The body-worn camera statute on its face does not allow the board to watch. Generally, what we do, and obviously we have to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis, is what I can say I have done is when I know a matter is coming up for review, I petition the court to issue an order that allows the board to watch the video. So we still have to follow General Statute 132-1.4 for that. And so that's what I do. I fill out a petition and I ask for a specific release to the board and the attorneys involved to be able to watch the videos associated with that event. But it would not include a public release. It just includes a release to the board and the attorneys involved.
Follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
So is that a state statute that we have to follow that process? Ms. Battle?
Yes, that is a state statute, North Carolina General Statute 132-1.4A. And it says that all custodial law enforcement videos must be petitioned before the court and cannot be released without a court order. It's very all-encompassing. It has very limited exceptions, I think, in subsection H. I don't have that in front of me, forgive me, but I believe it's subsection H that allows for release to a district attorney, release to another law enforcement agency if they were investigating something, or we could release publicly if we were looking for a missing person or a suspect. But aside from those limited restrictions, release to any other entity, person, council, body, anything would have to follow that petition route.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes, this is a follow-up to Councilmember Mitchell's question. I'd like to hear CMPD's or Marcus's or Mr. Jones's thought on the new disposition, the justified but preventable. What were the thoughts on that?
Do you want to hear from me or the city manager? Yeah. Not from me? Or either one?
I'll start. I guess the best example is what the chief said earlier. When you start to say something's justified but potentially preventable, how big is that pathway, right? In other words, is it that the officer shouldn't have gone on the call in the first place? And so it wasn't as if with the meeting that we had I guess it was last week, that we didn't understand or appreciate what was being asked of CMPD. It was just, how can you make sure you don't have an unintended consequence of this. And I understand exactly what the CRB is trying to do. It's just something that was given to us a week ago that we're trying to digest. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And just further, I believe we ended that with CRB saying they would work on some of the wording and language of that, and we would be more than welcome to hear what they come up with and consider that as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Winston.
Yes, I have one request and one question. I make this request as co-chair of intergovernmental relations.
Mr. Winston, we lost you there for a minute, Mr. Winston. That you, as co-chair of intergovernmental relations, and then we lost you there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I make this request as co-chair of intergovernmental relations. I've already talked to my council colleagues and staff, but as Mr. Bakari and Mr. Fenton and I are trying to, and as well as the committee is trying to figure out our legislative agenda as well as our overall legislative strategy, intergovernmental strategy. We need help from you all to do that. This is a unique year, being that we have potentially a whole lot of legislative requests, but we still have to go our tried and true of kind of whittling those down to 5 or 6 to be effective. While we're doing this, we know that we're taking this multi-committee approach to the work that is happening here in safe communities, at reimagining government's involvement in community safety. Part of the charge that the mayor has given us is to wrestle with this subpoena power question and request. So I know that there's been a lot of talk today, a great discussion around it. But my request is that to the chief of police and CMPD, I want to definitely give you a chance to clearly communicate what your position is, and whether or not that will be a request, as well as the heads of the Citizens Review Board. I would like that by September 22nd. That's one of the deadlines that we have in this process right now. But again, that request I am making, and of course, safe communities can, if you guys feel so compelled to make a recommendation from Safe Communities Committee, we would welcome that as well. But we definitely need something from Chief Jennings, CMPD, as well as the CRB. I have a question after that.
Would you like Chief Jennings to speak to that now, or you just asking for something?
No, I would like it to be written. Speaking is fine, but I want to be able to reference the document, what is our position and how we are to move forward. Again, as we are putting all of these requests together and figuring out how we're going to proceed from an intergovernmental standpoint.
Chief, do you want to address that quickly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just real quickly, I have no issue having that written, but my position's been pretty clear that I feel like if subpoena power, I'm in favor of it for CRB. However, I'm in favor of it holistically and not just for officers. So I'll be glad to put that in any document or writing that we need to.
And Mr. Winston, you said you have a question as well.
Looks like Ms. Jamison wanted to speak up because I did request some CRB as well.
Yeah, I just want a clarification, Mr. Winston. You're asking that you also want the CRB to put in writing our request for subpoena power as well and submit it to your committee, correct?
And like I said, I understand that we're in favor of it, but I know that as the discussion is being had, there are nuances, to it. As Chief Jennings said, he wants it to be all or nothing. I'd like to know what that means, right? And as we're figuring this out, as we're going to our legislative bodies, as we're talking to folks around the state, the more clarity, the better, as we figure out what our legislative agenda is and our overall intergovernmental approach.
Okay, thank you.
And your question, Mr. Winston?
Yes, so, we're here because City Council passed a policy where we will scrutinize and adjust CMPD operational and budgetary policy. And we are continuing to figure out how to get that done the best. I've talked to many folks over the past few months, and as we were getting here, there does seem to be a role for Citizens Review Board to play in that ongoing duty that we have. From my interpretation of the work that they do and experience, they are not necessarily scrutinizing and adjusting, but they are analyzing the way CMPD policies are or are not working in our streets and in our interactions with our citizens. So my question would be, I guess, to the chair of the committee, say communities as well as staff and the CRB, have there been any thoughts or considerations of how the CRB might more consistently interact with City Council to match that analysis with our duty to scrutinize and adjust policy?
Yeah, I think today is actually a good example of how that can be best done, which is having the chair as well as legal counsel from the Citizens Review Board come to council. Maybe that's an annual basis, maybe that's twice a year, and give us an update of what recommendations they have and the status of those recommendations, even beyond.
Yeah, that's where I would. We already do that once a year. I don't think it should be once or twice a year. They are looking at the way policy is working or not working, week to week, month to month, as their schedule permits or determines. So I guess that's my question. It just seems like we haven't started to think about how do we more closely weave the month-to-month, week-to-week work that is happening with our duty to scrutinize and adjust policy.
Well, unless I'm missing something, I don't think they're working week to week, but I do think that this is a more comprehensive look at the recommendations they've made over time and the status of those recommendations than I've seen on our 3 years in council. And I think we can do something more robust on an ongoing manner, but I would defer to Ms. Jamison if she feels like there is a way to do it better than the way we have or the way that we are now.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, make sure everybody understands. Citizens Review Board, we're basically controlled by our statute and what we're supposed to be investigating and the role that we have. So we definitely don't meet week to week or month to month and just look at CMPD policy. That's not in our statute for what our particular board does. So I'm not sure if Mr. Winston is confusing Citizens Review Board with the Citizens Input Group, which is looking at CMPD policies and making recommendations, because they're two separate entities.
No, that's not. I'm not confused. You guys are looking at when citizens bring these complaints forward. You are analyzing the policy and the laws that we have on the books with how they manifest in person-to-person contacts. So again, you're not necessarily scrutinizing, but you're a function of the way our policies are working in our community. So you provide, you can provide certain specific details and specific interactions, examples, for instance, of things that we might that might help us wrestle with the scrutinizing and adjusting of particular policies. So all I'm saying is that as you guys are looking at this, as you are looking at this case, I've never seen a Citizens Review Board kind of case file brought to City Council where we can kind of look at the questions that were asked, the concerns of citizens, CMPD's viewpoint, and we have never been able to kind of say, oh, well, there's something that we might want to work with here or there. We agree with it. We don't have that kind of level of interaction and work process.
Not to interrupt you, Mr. Winston, part of it is also the confidentiality requirement. There's a couple of things. Number one, we don't have that many cases that we review, so that you're thinking that we're ongoing reviewing case by cases all the time with Citizens Review Board. I think last year we may have had 3 cases total that we reviewed. And so when presenting a case file like you're talking about, we wouldn't actually be able to do a case file where we're saying these questions were asked, this question was asked, because of confidentiality rules. So our meetings, our hearings themselves, once we have an actual appeal, are confidential and so close to the public, so we wouldn't be able to release that type of information anyway. But we can definitely provide recommendations when they are publicized and when we are allowed to, when we're dealing with cases. But we also are bound by a confidentiality rule as well.
And
is that confidentiality rule a matter of law, or is this a matter of policy?
No, it's a matter of law.
So we're
all bound by. We all have to take an oath, and we're all bound by confidentiality when we get on the board.
And I think there's an opportunity for us to do a deeper dive here, and I agree with Mr. Winston wholeheartedly that we need to have more frequent touch points with the Citizens Review Board. I did jinx us earlier, so that's on me when I said we were moving along quickly. We do still have a Civil Service Board presentation and then 3 other agenda items, so I think we can go offline with some of that discussion, unless Mr. Winston has a separate question he wants to ask. I've got Mr. Newton, and then I want to get to Mr. McGill to talk about the Civil Service Board.
I just want to clarify with Mr. Baker, is that a matter of state statute, or is that a matter of policy in terms of our ability to interact with the work of the Citizens Review Board and the questions that are asked and the considerations of our own internal policies?
Councilmember Winston, I'd need to find out the legislation that established the Citizen Review Board, and I'll be able to give you an answer to that. I just haven't seen that in terms of the interaction and what they're entitled to do and what can be passed on to the City Council. But I'd like to take a look at that, and I can respond to you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Winston, this is Mr. Wright, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chair Eagleston, but I think, Mr. Winston, the answer is ultimately going to be that if the CRB review is part of the officer's personnel file, which it is because you're dealing with the disciplining or not of the officer, that material is confidential. And so that can't be, that can't be, the specifics of any individual case can't be shared and discussed outside the confines of the CRB. If cases lead to policy questions, obviously matters of debating policy are purely a matter of public record, but the specifics of cases, absent the press covering them in another way or CMPD being in a position to release information, typically those types of files, sir, I don't think the CRB would be in a position under North Carolina law to share those.
And to be clear, that is what I'm talking about. It's about the review and analysis. They are doing a potential analysis on the effect of our policies, and that is the job that we are charged to do, is look at the policy. So that is where I'm looking to get into, not necessarily the individual's personnel record.
By the way, Mr. Winston, I like your Rascal Flatts t-shirt. I didn't know you were a fan.
Now I'm a worker, us union stagehand, we have to work to do it.
I'm a fan of Rascal Flatts.
Victoria's also a Rascal Flatts fan. All right.
Pay the bills over here.
I've got Mr. Newton, but I'll also remind folks, after you've asked your question, if you can lower your hand so that I'll know next time you have a question that's a new one. Mr. Newton, cap us off on Citizens Review Board, and then let's hear from Civil Service.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank Mr. Davis for your presentation. That was very informative. I am myself supportive of all of the CRB's recommendations. That would include the original language pertaining to negligent or neglect of duty. I think we need to be very careful when we start talking about parsing language, and I feel like we need to trust the members of the committees that we appoint. Bear in mind that the folks on the CRB are all there because we took an active role in ensuring their appointments. And I feel like to the extent that we talk about unintended consequences of certain language, I feel like we should trust those folks and trust them to make the decisions that won't be arbitrary or overreaching. We put them there for a reason. Now, having said all of that, I wanted to touch on the issue, so 2 issues, one being the issue pertaining to language that would require officers to be present at CRB hearings. I think it's so important, and I feel like our goal should be one whereby we ensure that the CRB has all the information that it can possibly muster to make as well an informed decision as possible, and that they don't have gaps of information. Clearly, I understand that subpoena power is the ultimate way of doing that, right? It brings everybody to the table. But at the same time, I think to forego an opportunity for the CRB to get additional information that it might not otherwise have, even if it's not everything in its entirety, I still think is falling short of our goal to ensure that they have as much information at their disposal as possible. And so I would be supportive of that additional provision for that reason. And I guess I would ask the question of Tanya, and I would assume that this is why the CRB has asked for that recommendation, understanding that subpoena power is at this point, we might not see that happen, for quite some time, if ever. But under the circumstances, I think having an officer show up, I would assume the reason why it's in front of us is because the CRB understands that would allow them to get some more information that they otherwise wouldn't receive. So I'd ask Tanya about that. Is that the case? Do you feel like you would get a bit more information if an officer were to show up? And then I also would ask, so I know we haven't heard about the Civil Service Board, their role, their powers, but it is my understanding, we have two boards or committees within our city that oversee CMPD, one pertaining to citizen complaints, that's the CRB, the other to officer appeals or disciplinary actions. And, that Civil Service Board, now it's my understanding that they do have subpoena power, they do have the ability, as citizens who we appoint, to have an officer show up, and it seems like there's a bit of inconsistency there, and I just want to get confirmation on that the Civil Service Board does have that power. So first question to Tanya, is this about making sure that you get as much facts as possible, and that's why you place that recommendation forward, short of subpoena power being granted outright? And then also, I guess, over to Ryan McGill to say, is that correct that you have subpoena power?
Correct, Mr. Newton. Correct, Mr. Newton. We realize that the officer, especially the officer that is the subject of a case that we may be hearing, may choose to plead the fifth, but oftentimes there are other officers also on the scene when responding to an incident who could also shed light on what actually happened there that day. And so we would like the ability to talk to those officers as well, especially considering that we've had an opportunity to listen to the various interviews that have been conducted by IA, and they have follow-up questions that we can't get answered unless we have a chance to talk to those officers.
And so what I'm hearing is, without that opportunity, you're not necessarily getting all the facts before you're forced to make a decision. And in effect, your hands could be tied in making that decision.
Sure, that is the way that you are hearing it. Yes, that would be accurate.
And so, Ryan, when it comes to the Civil Service Board, now you do have the ability to speak with officers face to face, right?
Can we let Mr. McGill make the civil service presentation and then we dive into questions about civil service?
Sure, but I mean, this is pertaining to the recommendation from the CRB that is in front of us right now. And I just wanted to make that point that there is a discrepancy here between two boards that function to oversee the same department. I also, if the committee is inclined to take that any further, so be it. But I did want to make that particular point, and also wanted to ask, so from the standpoint of the roles of the committees, once again, two committees that oversee the same department, but seem to have a vastly different phrase of power here. Now, Ryan, with the Civil Service Board, it's my understanding that you do not serve in an advisory capacity. You actually overturn disciplinary decisions. Now, with the Citizens Review Board, it's my understanding that that's not the case, that the Citizens Review Board is exclusively serving in an advisory capacity. And I was just wondering, Tanya, has that ever come up? Has that ever been a point of conversation amongst CRB members, whether or not that advisory role is something where, quite frankly, you can make a decision, right? And it doesn't have to be adhered to or abided by. Now, thankfully, we've had wonderful chiefs who have listened and have done their part to make sure that your voice is heard. But to the extent that you serve in an advisory role, I mean, is that the case? That have there been any conversations pertaining to your advisory role and how that might impact your ability to be effective as a committee?
Yes, Mr. Newton. So after the Dan Curtis Franklin case, there was a lot of frustration among the board that we had a unanimous decision that the chief erred in the disposition of that case. And that's actually the reason why our board wanted to present to your committee to share a little bit more information about what we do as a board, the recommendations that we've made in the past. There was a lot of frustration among members that we, for the first time ever, really ruled against the chief and said that the chief erred. But there was really pretty much, it was kind of like, well, thank you for your recommendations, and we're just going to do what we're going to do. And so that's the reason that we decided to come before this committee today. So yes, we've had plenty of conversations, and there's been a lot of frustration in the past meetings regarding that. Yes.
And I understand that that's not one of your recommendations in front of the council today, but I just wanted to put that out there, make it clear, a little bit more information for everyone to chew on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. McGill, let's talk about civil service.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the committee and CMPD for the work you're doing. It's important, and I'm excited to be able to be a part of this. The Civil Service Board in North Carolina, there are 4. And Ms. Kelly could correct me, it's either 4 or 5, but it's Raleigh, Asheville, Charlotte, and Durham, I believe. We have 9 members of the board. We all take our roles very serious. We're a quasi-judicial board, meaning that when there is a trial or a termination or disciplinary action done or done through the chief, we are the final kind of say on, yes, is that, are we going to keep that, uphold that, or are we going to do something different? We are impartial, and we work very hard to remain impartial. And during our time, we have terminated, we have gone with the chief and terminated, and we've also retained employees. We've also sent back in our regard and our role as hiring authority, we have sent back candidates and asked the recruitment to ask the applicant to try again in a year. We're very engaged and also very engaged in the recruitment demographics. And we, after every meeting, after we've hired the potential candidates, we ask for a breakdown of those demographics. So in a nutshell, we are the hiring, we are the promotion, and we are oversight on termination and disciplinary. In regards to Councilmember Newton's question, we do have subpoena power. We have the power to subpoena witnesses, both police and civilian, to these trials. Since they are quasi-judicial, we act as a jury. We'll have, we have the defense and prosecution. City usually prosecuting the case. The defense is in defendants of the employee, and we have the ability to subpoena whomever we think would be prudent to the investigation or to the hearing. So in a nutshell, that is kind of what we do. There are a couple things that we have noticed in the Civil Service Act that are a little more vague in the wording. So Ms. Kelly had talked about us requiring or requesting an investigation being done on the June 2nd Kettling event. The board, we voted unanimously to have that investigation started. So that is another authority of the board. So the authorities we have is we can request an investigation be done to the chiefs, and we can sorry about that. We request the authority, and we have the subpoena power. Now, in regard to the June 2nd, we can request that the investigation be done, but we cannot require the CMPD to do it in a certain way. So during our request for this, the investigation, we added that we request that there be a third-party investigation. That is something we cannot, per the language of the Civil Service Board Act, require CMPD to do. Other than that, that is all we have on that. And I can answer questions in regards to the Civil Service Board and what we do, if there's anything out there, and then I will add on to what some recommendations came from what the committee gave.
Thank you, Mr. McGill. Thank you. Do we have any questions from Mr. McGill as it relates to the Civil Service Board? After this presentation, we're going to move back into training and recruitment. So I've got Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I think this is an important issue for us to consider. And the subpoena power is something I can speak for myself, I've heard about since I was running for office. So it's always talked about it, and here's an opportunity for council to take action. But I know that not everyone would be comfortable taking action today. So what I'd ask, Mr. Chair, is if we could have a meeting with the CRB and the Civil Service Board to really understand the differences in why one would have the subpoena power and why one wouldn't. This is an important issue. The CRB feels strongly about it. We do trust those members. So if we could have a follow-up meeting, perhaps, maybe the Safety Committee members, and really understand the impact, the possible unintended consequences. Because if it's something that's for the good of our public, we should be listening and prepared to make a decision on that, and also hear from CMPD. But this is an issue that I'd like to peel back the layers on and be able to obtain more information when there's not such a full agenda.
Agreed. I appreciate it, and I think including Mr. Fenton, Mr. Bakari, and Mr. Winston in that as well. I think the conversation earlier with Mr. Winston asking for written support from the chief as well as from the chair of the Citizens Review Board will hopefully give them more strength in their position as they go to Raleigh and seek that subpoena power that I think having subpoena power for both officers and citizens, I sense there is almost unanimous agreement on. Hopefully with the support of the chief, with the support of the Citizens Review Board, and the support of the council, that's something that our intergovernmental group can go down and find success in Raleigh on. Chief?
Yes, real quickly, I do want to say that I think just hearing the conversation, it sounds as if officers never go before the Citizens Review Board and never want to testify with them. I do want to confirm, and Tanya can probably either confirm this or correct me on this, that it is a rarity that the officers refuse to go and speak. I've only heard of one incident, but I've heard of numerous incidents where we can't get citizens to come and speak, where they could be just as helpful. So.
I'm not sure if our legal team is still on here, but I know that we've only had, as Chief Jennings said, one most recent incident where an officer refused to participate in the Citizens Review Board, but it has been a problem in the past for citizens, including this most recent case where citizens did not want to come and appear before the Citizens Review Board. So that has been an ongoing problem, more so than officers not participating.
This is Julian Wright. Chief Jennings is 100% correct. There's been one instance out of 90-plus cases where an officer declined to cooperate and participate in the process. There have been multiple instances where both CMPD and the Citizens Review Board wanted citizens to come in and be able to add further information and provide testimony about what happened in a situation. And for a variety of reasons, individual citizens have not been willing to come forward.
So hopefully we can find a way to close that gap in Raleigh, and I think we've got some good universal support on all sides to do that. Ms. Johnson, do you have any additional questions for right now?
know. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Winston, I believe you're going to wrap us up, and then we're going to get in training and recruitment discussion again.
Yes, a similar question that I have for the Citizens Review Board, a portion of this presentation. I think the Civil Service Board also does analyze the effects of our policies. I think it's different than CRB in that we're really looking internally about how our officers and how our firefighters, for that matter, follow policy and how those internal policies are governing. I think as we do continue to carry out this charge of scrutinizing and adjusting police policies, that it will be important to find ways that the Civil Service Board and City Council more seamlessly interact in that policy analysis portion of the work.
Agreed.
And Mr. Eggleston, Councilman Eggleston, some of the, you had a couple committee requests or feedback that they'd like to see improved. And one was there was a couple questions. We need to make it more accessible. A lot of the community does not know about Civil Service Board and what it does, and that we meet every month and it's open to the public. So we need to push that out to the public to allow them the opportunity to see what we do. Another was asked about the CMPD applicants asking about tattoos. The answers were brought back that it was a tattoos and a psychosocial history narrative done on each candidate. CMPD does do those. However, they request that the tattoos be photographed and documented so that for future reference. Another a request brought up by Robert Dawkins and the Safe Coalition was, and I'll read it to you verbatim since it's his policy and that it was, everyone thought that was involved thought it was a good policy. Was the problem, our community has pushed for over a decade to empower the Charlotte Citizens Review Board with the ability to subpoena witnesses, investigate cases brought before them, and make binding decisions on the cases that they hear. Unlike most cities in North Carolina, Charlotte has an existing Civil Service Board that makes decisions on an officer's discipline. How do we reconcile the problem that the CRB hears appeals from the public but does not have the ability to discipline, and CSB has the power to discipline along with the subpoena investigation powers but does not hear cases brought by the public? The action step. We proposed the ordinance governing both the CRB and CSB be amended to allow complaints that are sustained by the CRB and refuse any further action by either the city manager or CMPD police chief to be referred to the Civil Service Board in this scenario. The CRB acts as a grand jury and the CSB hears the sustained cases as a trial jury or an appeal. And those were what came out of our committee meeting.
And in that case, there would be some work to do at the state level as well. Correct, Mr. Baker? We would need, so I think that is definitely an interesting idea of how to modify the roles of those boards. And that might be another thing for the discussion that we just mentioned that we need to have as the Safe Communities Committee alongside Dana Fenton and our Intergovernmental Relations Committee to see what sort of chances of success we'd have in Raleigh in lobbying for that sort of change in charge if we decided that we wanted to go that route. But I appreciate you bringing that up. And
I have last one, sorry, Councilman.
Yeah.
And the last one was a 50-mile. Currently, CMPD allows police officers to live within a 50-mile radius, as a crow flies, of the city, and I believe. And the committee also requested that we look at making all civil service members live within the city and not outside the limits.
And I think that would be great for police community relations to have people that live near the folks that they are charged with protecting and serving. I think that's a discussion we'll also have to have in our Great Neighborhoods Committee because, as we know, many of our folks who work in police, fire, our teachers, our nurses, because of the challenges that we have around the affordability of housing in our community, there might be a disconnect if we are paying some of our workers a certain amount of money and then asking them to find housing in a community that is increasingly unaffordable. So I certainly agree with the sentiment there. I think we would need to find the balance between do we frankly pay our officers or any of the folks that would probably be better served by living in our city enough to realistically live in our city. But I do think that the intent there is good. Ms. Jamison, you had something you wanted to add there?
Yes, I wanted to go back to Ryan's point about publicizing the committee meetings. One of the things that Mr. Dawkins has brought up in the Citizens Input Group that I work with him on is that the Community Relations Committee is charged with or supposed to be helping promote at least Citizens Review Board. And so one of his concerns is that the meetings of Citizens Review Board aren't really publicized. They're not like on Facebook or YouTube where a lot of our people in the community are, so that they'll know about it. So that's one of the recommendations. And if you guys will go back to the packets that you received from the Citizens Input Group a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Dawkins' recommendations specifically regarding Citizens Review Board, that was one of the recommendations that he put in that packet specifically. Regarding Mr. McGill's comment on residency, I was going to talk about that when we get to the section where the Citizens Input Group discusses training, because my group is reporting out on, not training, but recruitment, because my group is reporting out on recruitment. So I can save my response to that for then, if you would like.
Yes, please. We'll do that if that's part of what you've discussed there. And as far as the broadcast of our citizen advisory boards and committees, I do think there's opportunities there to increase that. I do know, too, we've got a certain bandwidth limitation for staff because we have 30-some boards and commissions that advise the city council, and we've been, as a council, doing a fairly holistic overview and tweaking of our boards and commissions process, everything from the nominations to the rules that govern the folks who serve on them. And that might be something we want to add to that discussion, because I doubt the city would have the bandwidth to broadcast every single board and commission meeting, and given the overlap and the number of them, but there are undoubtedly ones like these two that probably would rise to the top if we were to weight the ones that the community might deem more important to have more readily accessible. So I don't know what committee might undertake that conversation, but I think that it might be one worth having. Ms. Ashmira, you had a question you wanted to jump in before we move on?
So when Ms. Johnson had asked a question about subpoena power, the response that was provided that the concern, or we have seen where citizens are not showing up to these meetings. So does committee have any recommendations on what can be done to get citizens to show up to meetings?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Mr. Winston, Mr. Bakari, and Mr. Fenton are trying to build the support and the documentation around. Is if in our ask to Raleigh, the ask we have made and will make now, I think with even stronger support in making that ask from CMPD, from the Citizens Review Board, from the council, would be subpoena power for the Citizens Review Board that would both compel officers and citizens to appear at those hearings when asked. And so if we can get Raleigh on board with that, then it solves the problem that's been identified there.
So just to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, so I understand that we have to get approval from Raleigh, but currently if there are any programs that we can initiate, LA has this program, I guess, Snitches Don't Get Stitches campaign. So something similar. I guess I'm interested in hearing from the board as to what are the programs that we can initiate. I don't know. I know we have been asking for this subpoena power for a long time. I mean, it's been, what, 3-4 years? So is there something actively that we can do to address this. But I don't have to have answers today, but just some recommendations from the board or other committee members that any other recommendations they might have.
Yeah, if there's something short of the legal authority to subpoena a citizen that we can do to encourage citizens to participate. That's the question. Yeah. Okay. And then, Mr. Newton, did you want to put a bow on civil service for us before we move on?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Real quick question, or I guess request. I don't know if Mr. Baker is in the room.
He is.
I wanted to ask, so I would be interested in a legal opinion pertaining to our ability to enact the Safe Coalition recommendation, the one that Ryan had mentioned about 5 minutes ago, whereby there could be an appeal from the CRB over to the Civil Service Board. You know, it's my understanding that from the standpoint of the General Assembly and our request to them, that is specifically pertaining to subpoena power for the CRB. I don't know if that's exactly what that would be if we're talking about a referral from one committee over to the other. So I would just be interested in a legal opinion from Mr. Baker as to whether or not for us as a city council to enact that type of provision within our ordinances, if we would need to get approval from the General Assembly to do that. That's something I'd like to know a little bit more about. And so hopefully you can do that for us, Mr. Baker.
I'll certainly take a look at it, speak with Mr. Wright and others, and provide a response to you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. If I can get everybody to reset their hand raises on the WebEx as we go into this next topic. We are running over, which we have allotted the time to do, and hopefully everybody can stay on with us. We do still have both review of police training and recruitment as one agenda item and review of CMPD rules of conduct as another. I'd really like to get to both of those today because there's some things on our meeting 2 weeks from now, September 1st, that I know there's a lot of urgency behind as well. So I don't want us to fall behind today and then end up having to push our items from September 1st further out. So I will ask both Chief Jennings as well as Mr. Rios and Ms. Jameson. I think we're going to provide some community input group feedback on the recruitment piece. Whichever one of you wants to start will be fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it's okay with you and Mr. Jameson, we have a training and education by Deputy Chief Patterson and Lieutenant Jason Helton, if they'd like to start it.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Manager, and all that's on the call. I'm Deputy Chief Stella Patterson, and with me is our Training Director, Lieutenant Helton. And so we didn't get to this one 2 weeks ago, so we'd like to just provide a quick overview of our training and education that we provide here at CMPD and the work that we're doing externally with some of our partners. So want to talk to you firstly about our police academy and the curriculum there. Also to the leadership training that we provide for our in-service officers to help with their professional development, and then some of the community training opportunities. Next slide, please. Next slide. And one more. So we are fortunate enough here in Charlotte to be able to run a full-scale police academy and a training program. We don't have to rely on a lot of resources like other PDs where they have to partner with community colleges or rely solely on colleges. We can run our own classes and provide our own training here in Charlotte. We have more than 50 certified instructors who are trained in various topics to include our basic law enforcement training, what we call BLET. Also, too, we have instructors that do our in-service training. Next slide. Starting with our basic law enforcement training or our BLET training, we do that here at our academy on Shopton Road. The state of North Carolina mandates that training and the curriculum, they also validate the training. So the state requires that we have a minimum of at least 640 hours of instruction. CMPD, we go well beyond that. Our recruit classes are 26 weeks. We do 400 hours more than what the state requires us to do. Our in-service training, which is for our officers after they become an officer, is 24 hours. That is mandated also by the state of North Carolina. And most of that training is done online so that we can maximize having our officers in the field rather than sitting in the classroom doing training. Next slide. Just to break down the curriculum for our BLET, again, which is a state requirement. These are the hours that are mandated by the state of North Carolina. When you look at this, you'll see that our high liability areas, we have the most instruction in. Our legal training is about 84 hours that we give to our recruits. Firearms training, 40 hours, and then our driving and our SCAT, which is our subject control arrest techniques, those are 40 hours apiece. Next slide. Beyond just that curriculum that I just showed you, CMPD does additional training for our recruits. As stated, we do 400 hours in addition to the 640 that the state requires. And this is just some of the subject areas that we focus on for our training. Next slide. Did you check out some?
Can you quickly tell me 2 slides back what the first 3 seconds reference is?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me what the surviving the first 3 seconds is a reference to?
Yes, I'll have.
Yes, surviving the first 3 seconds was developed by the North Carolina Highway Patrol in reaction to allow us to be more reactions, decision-making training. And what that is allow officers to see pre-assault indicators and things of that nature when dealing with the public to start to engage and de-escalate in a situation. So seeing verbal or physical assault cues and be able to start to de-escalate, move to cover so you don't have a lethal force encounter.
Thank you.
Yes.
And that's an interactive scenario-based training. All right, next slide, please. So aside from our basic law enforcement training, we provide training also for our in-service personnel. One of those areas is the crisis intervention team training. We started to do this in 2008. We began the program then, and we followed the international best practices model that for CIT that is backed by NAMI, and NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Health. So this is not a training that CMPD hosts. We don't own this training. It is hosted by the county, but we send our officers through it. Currently, we have 710 officers at CMPD. These are sworn personnel that have completed CIT. We've also expanded the program to include dispatchers and our non-emergency police personnel. And this is something that's a little bit different. Most agencies do not provide this training to their dispatchers, but we feel that it's important that when they receive the call, that they know properly how to handle it, how to dispatch it, and how to get the right officers on those calls. The CIT training is 40 hours long, it's a week-long training, 16 hours for the non-sworn component for our dispatchers. And the officer must be on the department for 1 to 2 years as a recommendation from CIT International to go through the training. We want to make sure that they have some experience and some understanding of how to really see the signs of somebody that's in mental distress before they're able to go to that class. We do offer a refresher course, so the county offers the refresher course, which is 4 hours, and all employees who are CIT certified have to do that every 2 years.
What would be some examples of the non-emergency? Was that like our animal care and control or other roles in the department?
No, those are our call takers. So like our 311, and our 911 dispatchers.
Okay, so the dispatchers are included in the non-emergency, whatever
Yes.
the rest of that acronym is.
Yes. The NEPS that you're seeing, NEPS, that's our non-emergency police services. So those are our call takers for not your critical calls, but you might get like a larceny call, you might get some of your misdemeanors, but you also can have somebody calling in that is under mental distress. And so we want to make sure that those call takers are able to identify that and then properly dispatch those calls.
Heard. I've got a quick question from Mr. Mitchell as well.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman. I thought over a year ago the City Council approved like $1 million for racial bias training. I don't see that part of the curriculum.
Yes, sir, we're getting to that.
Oh, okay, I'm just too early. I'm sorry.
All right.
I'm sorry.
No problem. We're getting to it. All right, so that's our CIT training. Next slide, please. In addition to the CIT training, we actually developed what we call our Community Policing Crisis Response Team. Again, for those individuals who are under distress, dealing with mental illness, this team was formulated in last year, April of 2019, after our officers made a visit to Houston, Texas, because they have a CPCRT program there. So we were able to model our program after that. It's really comprised of 8 officers and 6 clinicians. These are licensed clinicians that are mobile crisis trained, and the officers pair up, the clinicians pair up with the officers, and they respond to calls. Year to date, from January to July, they responded to 2,800 calls for service. Over the life of the program, we've responded to over 4,300 calls for service. The wonderful thing about having this team in place is that they're able to mitigate, and they're able to de-escalate the situation so that they, instead of arresting an individual that's under mental distress, we can defer them to the right services that they need. That last bullet there, you can see where 62% of community members were diverted from jail or psych hospitals or ERs and given the proper care that they needed. That's a win for us. We always want to make sure that if we can de-escalate a situation, that's the way that we're handling it. All right, next slide. All right, Mr. Mitchell, to your question here, this is our de-escalation and cultural competency, because this is where we get the questions, right? Everybody wants to know how much training are officers undergoing for de-escalation and for cultural competency or diversity training. So this is just an example of the courses that we provide in these areas. Our recruits in the academy, they're going to receive 56 hours of de-escalation and cultural competency training. Once they graduate from the academy, then every year they're going to get at least 4 hours of de-escalation training, and that varies from year to year. And also, at a minimum, 8 hours of either implicit bias, cultural training, diversity training, which as an agency we have been doing since 1994. This is not something new to us. All right, next slide, please. Next slide. I want to talk to you a little bit about our professional training, where as an agency we want to make sure that we're always developing our employees, that we are looking at opportunities for them to become more professional in their work. And so 2 areas that we have identified that we created internally to help our employees are, 1, our command college, and also 2, our sergeant's course. So I'm going to pitch it over to Lieutenant Helton to talk about command college, because he has been through it and he's the executive sponsor now for it.
Our Command College is our formalized leadership program for CMPD command staff and agencies, and that's lieutenants and above. And that's not, like I said, just CMPD. That is for outside agencies. We've had as far north as Virginia and some into Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and then all across the state of North Carolina to include the Highway Patrol. It's a comprehensive study in cultural proficiency, leadership development, community impact, governmental functions, media strategies, problem solving, defensive tactics, communication, health and fitness, and service excellence. So these are your high-level leaders in the organization. Realizing and looking at it, we do some training for officers that we've discussed, and we do some for command. We're realizing the gap. Last year, we designed the sergeant's course. So it's for the first-line supervisor at the rank of sergeant. It's a 6-week course. I'm sorry, transition that slide. So it's designed for the first-line supervisor at the rank of sergeant, 6 weeks course that convenes for 17 sessions. It consists of a class of 16 to 20 sergeants. It's offered quarterly, and it's more of the practical training focused on specific and high-liability job dimensions of a sergeant. Next slide, please. Topics include self-assessment, 360 review, different learning of leadership styles and police management, leadership and problem solving during critical incidents, because your sergeants are those leaders that are first on the scene out in the field. Basic fundamentals of policing, law and policy, crime fighting, community engagement, physical health, and then officer wellness and identifying those signs.
Aside from those professional development courses, we also offer classes in other areas for our in-service officers. We provide a special or a basic Spanish for law enforcement class, responding to elevated abuse, a tactical medical first aid class, which is an 8-hour class. Mental health first aid is an 8-hour class. We do a women in leadership class, and we also do personal branding. These are just examples of what we provide for our personnel. Next slide. Next slide. In addition to our training, we have partnered with the Race Equity Institute to provide training for our personnel as well. And this was formerly called Dismantling Racism. Some of you might be familiar with that. But in this partnership, we partner with RMJJ. To date, we've had about more than 700 personnel, but right now, actively, we have 700 personnel that have received this training. This training, we started in 2010, and we have been continuing to do it. All our SROs, or we endeavor for all our SROs to go through it. So we may have some new ones who have not attended this training yet, but we're looking to make sure that they are trained in this area. The wonderful thing about this 2-week workshop is really it's designed to give us a better understanding of just the inequities in our systems all the way around, and for our employees to be aware of that. So every opportunity we have to have them be a part of this class, we are doing that. Next slide, please. Providing community training opportunities is another one of our goals. We did design, CMPD designed 2 courses. One is this, the Communicating Law Enforcement Actions and Responsibilities Workshop, our CLEAR workshop, as well as our Citizens Academy. We got these recommendations really out of the 21st Century Policing document that President Obama's team put together in 2008. From that, we developed the CLEAR workshop. This workshop was previously known as the Transparency Workshop. It's a 3-day event with our community members. In the class, community members have the opportunity really to learn about our policies, our procedures, our staffing, how we deploy our officers. They look at how we respond to resistance and various other topic areas. With this training, we do it in conjunction with the community, so we host it at the academy, but we also go into the community to host the training. Orchard Trace off of I-85 and Sugar Creek has been one of the locations that has been gracious in allowing us to host the training there. Really gives an opportunity for community members to come out and be a part of it. Next slide, please. We also have our Citizens Academy. Many of you are probably familiar with that. The Academy used to be 12 weeks. We have condensed it now to 8 weeks, and some of the classes are provided online. Of course, we have done that so that we can get more classes in. Pre-COVID, that was the plan. We've had to halt a little bit because of the current situation. But there are 8 topics that are given online. And again, these are just some of the topic areas that are covered in the Citizens Academy: our mission, our constitutional laws, response to resistance. We also put everybody in this course through the simulation so that they can know how to react or see how the stress that officers are under when they have to make split-second decisions. They're also given an opportunity to go out on our driving course, not to drive, we don't allow them to drive, but they go on the driving course where we can do traffic stop simulations, and we walk them through that training. Next slide. And here's just a continuation of some of the courses that are provided through the Citizens Academy. And one final thing I will say about the Citizens Academy is that the members have the opportunity to do a ride-along with our police officers. They'll do 8 hours in the field with our officers to see the day-to-day work the officers do.
It's also a requirement for both the CRB and CSB members, correct? I know it is for CRB.
It is for CRB. I'm not sure about civil service, and maybe Ryan Gill can answer that, but definitely for CRB. All right, so this is in conclusion, I'd just like to say that, CMPD, we acknowledge that we are a learning agency. We're always looking at opportunities to be better with our training, with what we deliver to the public and what we deliver to our officers. So we're open to any suggestions that anybody may have in that area, and we're always working to ensure that we produce the best product that we can. Thank you for your time, and I'll open up to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Ms. Johnson, do you want to ask your question now, or do you want to hear the community input group feedback on this topic and then do questions?
I'll wait for the community input group.
Wonderful. We'll get it all then, and we'll have our questions then. If Mr. Rios would like to lead that discussion.
Yes, I will defer to Tanya Jameson, who has already presented today in reference to the Citizens Review Board. Tanya is a member of Group 1, which was tackling this issue. She's standing in for Professor Jeff Alpert, who wasn't able to attend. Tanya will give an overview of the Group 1's subgroup analysis on both recruitment and training. Tanya?
Go sent you all the responses we got back on the, I'm going to start with the recruitment. And a couple of responses that I want to highlight for brevity was that Deputy Foster mentioned the importance of having actual recruiters who could go and do interviews instead of just relying on internal affairs investigations when it comes to looking at officers who are doing lateral moves into CMPD. Her thoughts were that IA doesn't necessarily have all the files, or not every officer who's making a lateral move into CMPD necessarily has an IA file. And so you could actually send recruiters out into the field to interview members of other departments or people who are transferring into CMPD to get a better understanding of that officer's and the officer's mindset and whether or not they're a good fit. The other thing that Deputy Foster and both Professor Jeffrey Alpert, and just to give you a background, Professor Jeffrey Alpert, who's on this committee, is a criminology professor at USC, South Carolina. So last week was the first meeting that he could actually attend. And so he gave us a lot of feedback that's also included in the report that Federico has sent you all. But both Professor Alpert and Deputy Foster mentioned the importance of looking at and reevaluating the psychological tests that are administered to CMPD. Deputy Foster's thoughts were looking at it and just seeing if they are doing a good job, and basically if we need to sort of tweak anything. Professor Albert's thought was really doing a deep dive evaluation and looking at not only the psychological tests that are administered, but then also going back and tracking officers who have had disciplinary issues and how they performed on those psychological tests, and are those psychological tests an actually good indicator of whether or not that officer would be a good fit for the department. The other thing that Deputy Foster and our entire committee also were making recommendations around were residency, and Ryan McGill mentioned that from his group as well, was the importance of having more CMPD officers who actually live in the district, because now currently majority do not live in the district. And the only pushback we heard was actually from Deputy Foster. Her argument was that we've tried it in the past to get officers to live in the city, and part of it is taxes. But she said the other part of it as well is that officers don't necessarily want to basically be on duty 24/7, and that kind of becomes part of it. If you do live in the city, then it's like you never have a day off. You're always pretty much, in officer mode, and so you don't have that kind of time off that everybody needs from work. So that was her pushback regarding actually living and requiring officers to live in the city. But as a committee as a whole, we were talking about how can we incentivize more CMPD police officers to actually live in the city. So please make sure you look at Deputy Foster's recommendations and thoughts on that. And then moving forward to training, one of our biggest, Professor Albert's biggest concern regarding training was, have you all done any type of, or has the city done any type of evaluation on the effectiveness and the impact of the training? And so his suggestion, if you'll note on his subgroup analysis sheet, is that developing and implementing a survey and holding focus groups of officers who have been on the department for a while to determine which areas could be improved. And this should be done by an outside entity like maybe UNCC, for example, to do that. And then the other concern was the number of officers who are actually received CIT training thus far. I think that, I forgot the number, but it's also less than half of the department who are actually eligible to receive the training. And the concern is that they can't receive the training because there's not enough classes that are being offered by the county to get more officers through the program. And so is there a way that city council or the city can either do its own CIT training or bring in an outside entity to do CIT training for CMPD officers? Or is there a way that the city can work closer with the county so that we can offer more CIT training classes so that more officers can go through the program as well as dispatchers? And that's my conclusion.
Thank you, Ms. Jamison. So for any of our leadership staff at CMPD, that seems like a quick and easy question to answer. Is there more demand from our patrol officers for the CIT training than we've got bandwidth to put them through it right now?
Chair or Chief, did you want to?
Yeah, I can speak, just fill in if I leave anything out, but the short answer is yes. A lot of that's because of a lot of cancellations with CIT recently because of COVID. However, it is an incentive-based with our SPO program to where officers that will spend the 40 hours to go through the training, it counts as a credit towards their senior police officer program, which is pay incentive as well. So we have historically been able to fill all classes that have been offered, and as you heard earlier, it's not that CMPD dictates when the classes occur, that we join in with the classes when they are presented to us. So.
All right, and we've got Ms. Johnson first. I will note we're at 1:30. We do have a hard stop at 2. Mr. Driggs was kind enough to adjust the meeting time for his committee's meeting after us, but we do have to be concluded at 2 no matter where we are on our agenda. So, Ms. Johnson, lead us off on the training and recruitment.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation on the training. These are great great courses, and sounds like we really have a diverse and are developing a diverse force. This is something I'm very passionate about. I work with those with brain injuries and invisible injuries, so I know how important this training is. And we know that Keith Lamont Scott had a traumatic brain injury, so being able to recognize that this type of information is important. So I kind of have a couple of questions regarding this. The CIT officer, when someone's calling for a CIT officer, does the caller need to ask specifically for a CIT officer on the call, or is that a question by the dispatchers? Do they ask if there's a history of mental health or behavioral challenges?
So, Councilwoman, yes, they our dispatchers do not ask directly, but they ask questions to elicit information to see if somebody is in mental distress or may have a history of mental illness. Certainly don't want to accuse anybody of that, but we would want to get that information on the front end if we have it. And to your earlier point on that, yes, the individual can ask specifically for an officer that is trained in CIT.
Okay.
And just, I'm sorry, just to follow up a little quickly, the individual does not have to ask, however, because if the dispatcher recognizes that it's a call that that would be better served by a CIT officer, that's an option that they dispatch that way. And also CIT officers in the field, when they hear the call for service go out, they are also trained to identify themselves to dispatch to that call for service if they feel that's what's necessary.
Okay, that's kind of a segue to my next question. So if someone has called and requested a CIT officer in the past, so if that address, if there's someone that might have a history of behavioral challenges, is that information kept in the system so that an officer might be sent out proactively in the future?
Chief Patterson, I'd like for you to answer that and talked about some of the program that we're looking at doing as well. But short answer is it has to be flagged with our dispatch, and that's something that's discretionary amongst the officers and the dispatch. But Chief Patterson, would you like to talk about that further?
Yes, sir. This is wonderful. We're going to be launching a program that's called Safe Outcomes. It'll be in a couple weeks. And that is a cooperation with the community and our mental health specialists and ADA programs to identify individuals who have special needs, perhaps deaf and impaired, someone who has as you were stating, maybe a TBI or something previously, that we can identify, and it's not we as CMPD, but the individual will be able to pass that information on to us. It will be logged so that officers going on a call will have that useful information. And it will have things such as, is the individual afraid of the police? What is the best method in which to interact with this individual? Is it better just to have him in a seated position when you talk to him? And this is something that we have been looking at for a while now, but we're at the point now that we're ready to launch that. So we should see that in the next couple weeks.
That's excellent. Thank you. And then my last question, I don't know if this information is tracked. Do we track like victim information? Like, is there any study of police shootings or in Charlotte or nationally? Like, how many of these victims have those type of mental illness or hearing impaired or something that might have been a learning or teachable moment for the officers? Are we tracking that is that information tracked about suspects or
victims?
Yeah.
Chief, I'm not sure if you wanted to answer. You want me to just respond to that?
You can respond because I don't have the answer.
So formally, we at CMPD have not been tracking that information, but the FBI FBI is looking at that use of force information that since 2017, that they had started to compile. And in that information, it asks you questions and demographics about the individual that was involved in the shooting, the officer demographics, and information related to that. So it's partly tracking some of that information as much as they have in their database. And each agency has to opt in to do that. CMPD, we have opted in to provide that information. So it is being captured in that manner. We're not capturing it here at CMPD, but we're working with the FBI on it.
And just to get in further, we have opted in, and we've actually provided data and gone back to provide data to the FBI to cover, I think, since 2018. And so we want to make sure that we have the proper data with the FBI that even went back to that point. So we're thinking that's going to be a positive thing to help track some of the things that you're talking about, and we look forward to seeing what those results are going to be.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Mr. Newton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank you, Chief, Deputy Chief, and all other officers here in the meeting who are part of our training programs. Your commitment to those programs, to the diversity of that training, the frequency. So the updated training, I think, is really fantastic and really speaks volumes about the quality of our department. Having said that, one of my passions, much like Councilmember Johnson, is CIT. CPCRT is another one. I was so excited and thrilled when we enacted that. I believe it was last year. It might have been in one of the presentations there. And I know that we're a leader in that regard throughout the entire country. And it's really great to be on that front cutting edge of new implementations of community policing. Having said that, and I wanted to mention too, so I speak at CIT graduations. There's always an open invitation for all council members. I know that our chair has attended graduations in the past, and council member Isold as well. And if anyone has any questions as to when any future training graduations are, please let me know, and I'll make sure that you get the invitation to be there. But moving back to that CIT training slide, I think it was maybe slide number 6 in the presentation. I did see a bullet point there that had mentioned that that officers have to. I think I'd written this down. Officers must be in the department for 1 to 2 years before being eligible for CIT training. And I wanted to ask about that. Why is there that 1 to 2 year criteria before an officer can receive training?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You can go ahead and answer, Chief.
Yes, sir. So that's the best practices model that's given to us by CIT International. That is the recommendation just across the board with them. And really the logic behind it is you want your personnel, before they become CIT certified, to at least have some experience in dealing with people, talking with people, being able to identify perhaps signs that somebody is in distress, that somebody may have a mental illness situation, which we feel that when, and so does CIT International, a brand new recruit does not have that skill set necessarily. They are learning about policing, their entry level, they've gotten the basic training. We really want them to get into the seat, get their feet wet a little bit to understand it better. So that's really the model behind that. This is a model that has been in place for 30 years now, and all agencies adhere to that.
Thank you. thank you for that clarification. And I also wanted to bring up the point that we have come a very long ways when it comes to our implicit bias in CIT training. With CIT training in particular, yes, there are 700 officers who have been trained, but that is leaps and bounds beyond the number of officers that were trained even 5 or 6 years ago. So thank you so much for all of your hard work on this, Chief, Deputy Chief, and please keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. And Mr. Winston.
Mr. Chair, if I could, Mr. Chair, if I could just make one point concerning what he stated. CMPD, roughly 40% of our officers are CIT trained, which is above the recommended number for CIT. Their number is 15%. So we have exceeded that, and we're really happy to do that. And like Chief Jennings says, we'll continue doing that, especially now that we've provided us an incentive for it. So our goal is to have all of our patrol officers at a minimum to be CIT trained.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Mr. Winston's going to wrap us up before we conclude today's meeting with a review of CMPD conduct.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Here in Mecklenburg County, we do not have any type of trauma-informed, necessarily first responder network. So we are forced to send a lot of times law enforcement to situations where other type of trauma-informed specialists might be appropriate. I think the CIT program is great. I think the CPT program is great. But I would like to know, I would like a cost analysis. These law enforcement officers have to go through copious amounts of training around law enforcement, their primary duty and responsibility. So once they actually get into the CIT training, CTP, and these other trainings that were listed, we have incurred significant costs. But I don't think we actually know what those, as council members, we don't know what those costs are. So I would like a cost out of how much it takes to get CMPD officers trained up to the levels that we have to respond to these traumas and crises that aren't law enforcement based. And we can talk about it more offline about the details and what all those costs are. But I think that is important for us to know, again, as we continue to scrutinize and adjust.
Councilman Winston, I can speak quickly that the CIT training is no cost to CMPD except for the time and salary of the officer. But we can certainly get other training, CPCRT, anything else required like that, and we can try to come up with something for you.
Yeah, and I would say, again, like I said, I think the salary is part of that cost, right? If, for instance, if we are, if there's a sergeant that has a certain amount of training, you know, those are costs, real costs to facilitate our 911 response network. So as we are looking at ways to change, perhaps change the way we do things, I think that cost-benefit analysis can really inform any potential paths, different paths that we might consider going down in the future.
Great. Thank you, sir. And if I can get everybody to lower their hands again, we're going to move to our final subject matter for the day, which is a review of CMPD rules of conduct that I think Chief Jennings will lead off on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I promised I'll be as quickly as possible and cover as much as I can on this. So we'll start with the slides of rules of conduct. If we can go to the next slide, please. So CMPD prides itself on ensuring that our goal is to serve the community with the utmost integrity and in most professional manner. So the purpose of the rule of conduct is to ensure that our employees accept that role and responsibility and some accountability as related to our goal to ensure that we are serving the public appropriately. So next slide. So employees are all of our employees, we expect them to conduct both on and off duty to maintain professional standards regardless of their status, work or off duty as well. And we investigate those complaints against employees to a final disposition internally. So we have a responsibility to address employee behavior, anything that discredits our department or impairs its effect or our effect on operations. So we do have make sure officers do have due process. That's part of it as well, but we have the responsibility to do that internal investigation. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay. All complaints of rules of conduct, they are investigated by internal affairs. There's two different ways that we can see that those investigations are completed. One being the internal chain of command, the independent chain of command review, which means that we bring supervisory and command level of those officers that are not within their chain and does not have knowledge of that particular rule of conduct violation. So they're given the information. They do the internal affairs will do the investigation, and then the board, internal chain of command review board, will get the documentation for them to review, and then they will have a hearing similar to what we hear about with CRB and Citizens Review Board and Civil Service Board as well. And the other area would be the Service Area Bureau for those more minor offenses that you can have a bureau level chain of command board hearing as well. This is just a slide of all of the rules of conduct. I think there's another page of that as well. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, here's our rules of conduct. Next slide, please. So employees are expected, they will obey all the laws of the U.S. and then the state and local jurisdictions. And they also are required that if they are given a direct order from a supervisor, if that direct order is a violation of any moral or illegal act, then those officers do have the ability to deny that order, and they will not be disciplined for anything in that nature. So employees arrested or charged, if an employee is arrested, they have 48 hours to notify me or the chief of police of that charge. And also if their license or driver's license is suspended or revoked for any particular reason, that also must be reported directly to me. So, and what I'm going through are just a few of the rules of conduct that we pulled out to have some discussion. So if we can go to the next slide as well. Arbitrary profiling is a big one that's been on the forefront for the last several years, and you can, I won't read every bit of that, but we will ensure that officers' activity is not motivated by any arbitrary stereotype or profile, and you'll see the types of those to include racial profiling, other bias-based policing, any type of language, and foreign nationals we will treat and provide law enforcement protection to all foreign national members within our jurisdiction as well. And next slide. The next one is arrest, search, and seizure. That will highlight officers will not make any arrest, search, or seizure which they know or should know is not in accordance with the law. Next slide would be harassment. And you can read there's no employee intentionally subject any fellow employee to any verbal or physical harassment of a sexual, ethnic, racial, disability, or religious nature. I think that coincides with many employment rules and laws as well. And then unbecoming conduct is a big one, and probably one of the, I would say one of the most used within our department, that if an officer brings CMPD into disrepute or anything that reflects negatively upon our department, we can have the rule of conduct charge of unbecoming conduct, and generally those have significant corrective actions that go along with them if they are sustained. Next slide. Response to resistance, formerly use of force, which we've had several discussions about, and you can see where we discussed that officers will use no more force than necessary in the performance of their duties, and will then do so only in accordance with CMPD procedures and laws. So we have some guidelines there when we will respond to resistance, and we do have any use of force or response to resistance is investigated by our internal affairs. So if we'll go to the next slide, just some historical content. In 2014, the city of Charlotte, we passed the Civil Liberties Resolution, went into effect on June of 2015, and it protects citizens from racial profiling and provides the Charlotte Citizens Review Board with the opportunity to hear those complaints as well. And then in 2017, Rule of Conduct 43, that was the duty to report, which added CMPD policies. We don't want to confuse that with duty to intervene, but duty to report basically is an officer has a duty if a use of force or some sort of conduct is conducted that's a violation of our policy. They have a duty to report that information as well. So, and then next slide and last one is Rule of Conduct 10 of neglect of duty. We've had some discussions of that earlier today. And that's one that we added the duty to intervene. And as we discussed earlier, as far as the whether the Citizens Review Board will have the authority to review those complaints that deal with neglect of duty and particularly duty to intervene as well. So I know that was very quick and run through, but if you have any questions, about our rules of conduct, I'll be happy to answer them at this time.
I don't see any at the moment. Appreciate the presentation. We'll give folks another second to raise their hand if they do, but I also want to save a few minutes for Mr. Jones to give us a preview of all of what, much of what the community input group will be looking at next week, and then subsequently our committee will be looking at the following week on September 1st at the same time of 11 a.m. Not seeing any. Chief Jennings, I appreciate that. Mr. Jones, tell us what is on the horizon.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And congratulations on getting through the entire agenda today. So the upcoming topics, and I will go back to Council Member Watlington. There's a pattern here that something's presented, it comes back, and then even a third time there may be an action that comes out of the committee. So we will have the community input group report out. So now I'll let Federico talk about what's in store. But first I'd like to, I guess, do the obvious. We'll come back again with the rules of conduct. We'll come back again with 8 can't wait. As the chief said, we're down to 1.5, something close to that. But then we will be able to begin passive protests, peaceful demonstrations, and First Amendment activities. Councilmember Johnson, thank you for your patience with that. We had queued it up for today, but as you can see, I don't think we would have had a time to have a robust discussion. So having said that, hopefully that's confirmed with the committee, and I would like to have Federico talk a little bit about what we should be hearing from the community input groups.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So again, we will begin our discussions on passive protests and peaceful demonstrations. Our presentation at the next meeting will be from an expert related to that issue, as well as First Amendment activities. We'll begin to look at those. We are completing subgroup analyses on the youth and community engagement programs that we will be able to present at the next session. And we have other topics that we haven't quite pinpointed which one of those has come up, but before the end of this week, we will know that for certain.
Wonderful. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair, if I may. And I think it'd be helpful as we go forward, just a recommendation is to be able to provide us with some data. I think we got a lot of good reports today, but I think a lot of us need to understand the scope of the project, the scope of the issue. So a prime example on the subpoena, we heard actually that on one case that a CMPD officer did not show up, but the biggest problem is citizens. And so as we move forward, I would like to have that type of data presented to us. I think it will help us more kind of where we want to go, what type of policy we like to develop. And so even for the next meeting, if we can have those statistics, I think it'll be helpful for that one. And, Mr. Chair, I do have one question for the outstanding young lady who made the presentation. It's on the CLEAR workshop. How can we get citizens to show up, to attend that? I think that's an excellent workshop. It looked like it's taking place in District 4, but it wasn't any contact. So, Chief, you don't mind sending that information to us, where citizens can sign up, how can they participate in that CLEAR workshop?
And is that one, and this might be an answer you have off the top of your head, is that one where we have less demand than we have bandwidth and we need to fill seats, or we have more demand than we have bandwidth and we need to find a way to expand the program?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's difficult to answer now because of COVID. However, when we were going pretty strong with the CLEAR workshops, where we actually took them to community forums and we would participate in those. So they stayed pretty busy, and there's only a handful of instructors that can actually teach that as well. So,
okay,
great. Mr. Vice Chair, you want to do the honors of making the final motion today?
I'd make a motion. We adjourn this meeting.
I accept your motion, and I appreciate everybody's work to get us through. Ms. Watlington, do I hear you?
Yes, I thought my hand was up. I tried to raise it. I apologize. I did have one final follow-up question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking through the follow-up report with the Q&A. Thanks. There is a lot of information here. I will go through it. The only thing that I don't see offhand, but I just wanted to verify with staff, was that the overlay of the youth engagement programs versus our top spots was somewhere in the mix.
Maurice.
Yes, Ms. Watlington, that was asked outside of the meeting, but yes, definitely CMPD staff is actively looking to compile that. That just took more time, and they're still working on that, but it's definitely on their radar. Thank you.
I'll second the motion to adjourn.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Godspeed to the